He's empty.
Good evening, all. Welcome to this week's edition of a Midweek Geek. We were busy talking food here, which is why we're probably about 30 seconds too late. Because look, we're nerds. We like our food, especially takeaway food, and that's mainly what we were talking about. I'm pleased to say that on my clearly the keenest one tonight was Sean, Major's Musings, because that's the order people get added. So, good evening, Sean.
Hello.
Hello. And then Saxius. Hello, Saxius.
Hello.
And Elfbait wasn't entirely sure when he was going to join us, but he's got here from the start tonight.
Yeah.
But you weren't the first person in, as usual.
No. I had actual things to do.
So that's my panel, at least initially tonight. People are welcome to join us if you have something to say. The link is in the Discord, always is. So how's gaming been this? Like, before we get on to topic, because no Saxis is sat there going topic. We have a topic, but I'm going to say hello to chat first, actually, because chat have been very, very busy while waiting for the stream. Everyone seems really eager. Halakar was the first one to chime in. Echo's been about, and so's El, and there's Elfbait commenting an hour ago. Brian, hello, Brian. And there's Major's Musings commenting, and R.W. Bishop. Is that Roland Bishop in disguise? Have you changed your name? Then Halakar again, and Daniel Kearney, regularly here on a Friday, not always here on a Wednesday, but usually he's a Friday regular. Ian McDonald's about, and Dualumin, and there's DM James. Oh, Crafting Gamers here too. So yes, it's nice and busy already. So hello, all of you, and those of you who've got channels, shill your channels, tell everybody about it in chat and all that sort of stuff, and good to see you're investing money into the UK economy, DM James. There's not many people here who are, judging by the way our shop's doing at the moment. But so, games in the last week or so. Last Thursday, we played a bit more Shadow of the Demon Lords, didn't we, Saxius? More disgusting goblin behavior.
Mm-hmm.
More inadvertently bringing about the end of the world and having a lot of fun doing it. And then I didn't run anything this Saturday. And on Monday night, I ran MERP for my local group. But something I haven't done in MERP for a long, long time. It's just a standard sort of cave dungeon crawl. And that's what it became. And it was quite refreshing. And the characters got absolutely battered. One of them's now got a broken leg from suffering a critical. That's good. If anyone knows about the healing rates in MERP, a broken leg, that character might need to be basically sat out the game for 6 months. Anyhow, any games from you chaps?
Just my 5th ed game, which is once every couple of weeks. The group is learning that even though it's 5th ed, it's still deadly, and so they played it real smart, and the dice were with them, so they had a full sweep this game. Lots of fun. They got to feel like epic superheroes. Hungar's starting the bidding.
Hungar's off. Here we go. The bidding for the insult. We're currently $2 nerds at the moment. We're $2 nerds. Yeah. Cheers, Hungar. So it's just been the 5th edition game, is it?
This coming weekend I've got my OSE and my my AD&D, but in the past, since the last stream, no, it was just the 5e game.
Okie dokie. Any video making, or are they sort of a bit quiet at the moment?
Well, it's a process. I hate making excuses for myself, but a friend of mine is a sound guy, has offered to do full pro cleanup of the sound because he wants just to keep in practice. Nice. So what I want to do is do a bunch of videos in a block and then send him all that, and then I can start releasing them as they get ready. So
There's no problem with your sound, though.
Yeah.
I mean, to my untrained ears, it sounds good.
that's what I asked him. It's like, is my sound that bad? He's like, oh no, I just want to practice. So, but
Oh.
no, that's fine.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So so I got to do them in blocks. The other thing I want to do is I'm downloading Final Cut Pro. It has a few more features for editing, and they give you, I think it was a 60-day free trial. So what I want to do is compile all the raw materials so I can edit it all at once and use the trial as opposed to wasting the free trial, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense. Saxius.
Yeah, Shadow of the Demon Lord, as mentioned, quite happy with how that's going. For a game where I'm just sort of going a bit more player oriented, it's very very good. The shenanigans are being kept up. More rules are being made amongst the group of how the rules are amongst the goblins. I had my start of the game, which, in my perspective, I think I really didn't run it the way I should have. So that's some notes for me to go away, prepare for this coming Saturday, and then just improve. So then I think I do well. Nothing was said from the players yet, so at least they had fun, I hope. But I think I could have done better. And my one DM, one player game, my character died. He was ambushed by.
So your DM got your revenge on you then?
Yes, he did. He got me very good. He got me with, oh god, they're called canines in this system. They're basically goblins but dogs. So I got ambushed by 8 of those. And I
In
was on
Shadow
a-
of the Demon Lord, our goblins are being promoted to dogs, though, aren't they? Because dogs
Yes.
are higher up in the hierarchy than goblins.
Exactly. So it's a weird way how Shadow of the Demon Lord has got it all set up with you guys going, oh yeah, we're absolutely dogs. Because dogs are man's best friend. It's just logical that we're moving up the social ladder.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and again, I have to give for the Shadow of the Demon Lord props to the players for convincing the priest to go and save this man who was possessed and needed to be salvated, be given salvation, only to be led into a demon cult's lair to be captured. So it's one way of getting one of your 3 objectives. Now you just need a lot of innocence and magical components, which we've decided these magical components will be achieved from getting it from the local wizard who's meant to be going out, foraging this coming days. So
And he might just encounter us along the way.
I look forward to see how you guys do it. You have put it through some other motions, but I won't take up any more of Elf's time.
Oh. Yeah. So Monday's game was on break because one of my players was off doing an all-star roller derby event. And so we did character generation for a different game. We did some Marvel face rip character generation. So that was fun, and my dog is going crazy upstairs. I did get a chance to meet up with a longtime internet buddy at the local game store here in St. Louis. He lives locally, so and he's got an OSE game that he's running, so that's laying some groundwork for some extra gaming. And then, other than that, I have game tonight too. I actually had to go play in a D&D game, so.
Plenty of gaming.
Yes, and then writing stuff and doing videos and stuff now. So
Keeping yourself occupied.
yup.
Right. So we do have a topic. And the topic for this week's stream is character creation methods. And the hello, Kabuki Kid, and the different character creation methods that we've employed, what we like, what sort of games and what sort of styles of characters they produce, the pros and cons, and all that sort of good stuff. I'm going to lay my marker down straight away in that I like to have a sense of randomness in whatever character creation method is chosen, because I rarely start a game with an idea that I'm going to play this type of character.
Mhm.
I like to sit down, roll dice, and let the dice decide. That's if I'm playing a traditional fantasy game. Obviously, it depends on the system, but if it's something D&D related or MERP related or anything along those other lines, I won't go in with this whole background planned in my head, and I won't pre-prepare what powers I want a character to have. I just want to grab the dice and see what the dice give me, and I find a great thrill in that. I find a great sense of satisfaction in that, and I like to use the dice as inspiration. So for D&D purposes, most versions of D&D, either if you're playing basic D&D, 3d6 down the line works beautifully. If you're playing any other version of D&D, 4d6 rearrange. No need to change anything, something that isn't broken.
Pretty much.
But obviously other systems use other methods. We have the life and career path style method that's used in Traveller and Conan. We have various sort of point buy methods where you start with a basic framework and you can add bits and pieces to it. The One Ring, for example, you start with basic stats based on your race, and then you can add bits and pieces to that. But you are pretty much governed by how your race is to begin with, but you have got some flexibility. Call of Cthulhu, I like the idea of everyone having base levels of starting skills, and then you train up certain skills based on your profession. I like having a if you're going to do a building method using some sort of point by adding of skills or stats or whatever, I like to have restrictions and flavor related guidance in place and for that to be followed. I do not subscribe at all to the do whatever you want, anyone can be anything mentality. So I've placed my my cards on the table. Let's have a little cards on the table from each of you about what you prefer.
Royal Flush. Oh, sorry, wrong game. Yeah, I'm more or less the same. I like. I mean, most of my games are D&D, but I like having restrictions. I like having requirements. Sorry, requirements for rolling. Like Blood Paladin, most famously, you need that 17 charisma in old school D&D. It makes those classes a little more special if they don't come up all the time, or if you can't just choose to be one. For the most part, in any game, I'll look to, especially if I'm new to a game, I'll look to the default method. What is the default recommended method? Go from there. And that holds true with most games, except for me, 5th edition. I make everybody in my 5e game roll 3d6 because 5th edition is so player friendly that low stats don't really matter. There are other ways around it. But for 1st edition, 46 drop the lowest. That gives you flexibility. It's just sort of mathematically right that the rare classes will be rare enough, but still achievable. Right. Yes. The only class I've only seen one of in the past 5-6 years is a Bard for 1st edition, where you need 4 15s. But everything else comes up regularly enough. And I hate point buys. I hate point buys and I hate builds.
We'll come to more specific pros and cons of each method in a bit, but I'm with you on that last point. Saxius, what sort of methods do you tend to favour?
Well, it really sort of goes down for what am I running. So if we are, again, as we said, if we're gonna go with like standard D&D, 46 is the safest option. I like to advocate for 3d6, associate or allocate as you prefer, simply because I think it often fits better within the world that I tend to run. So that's what my preference is, but I do recognize that most players will just shoot me down. When it comes to more freeform or sci-fi orientated, I prefer what's it called, like the progression where you've got like almost like backstories, like pre-built, like you've got your life paths building up to that event, because I find that it helps players and me generate a very good way of like pre-establishing what kind of group we have, and it also means that the group has to initiate a lot more internal communication in regards for how do they know each other, how are they working along, how did they resolve setups for a crew, for example. And for that's where I sort of try to make it more of a team building exercise, because the way I see it is that it is a team building game to begin with. So rather than just taking 4 random people, throwing them together and going, let's see what happens, it helps sort of preemptively build in the relationship between the different players. So that's my take on it. It depends really, but I prefer sort of grittier, lower stats generation.
Okay. Right. We've got to try and guess what Elfbait prefers.
Too late. No, I do like point by and character build kind of systems.
This is why we're on opposite ends of the quad here.
Now, that said, I like them for the games they're in. I would never want to substitute D&D character generation for something else. I feel that D&D's style of character generation, for example, fits its style of RPG. D&D is a pretty minimalist, simple game system, and having randomly determined characters and character sets, and then the class abilities are, I mean, until you get to things like 5th edition and 3rd edition, class abilities are pretty focused. So, you have, it can afford some randomness in there. But in something like, I mean, and then you have combinations are good too. Like Call of Cthulhu has rolled stats, but your skills are kind of built from your background points. I do tend to like guided character generations, even if they are based on build or build points. And like, for example, the life path systems a lot of times are guided unless they're completely random. It's like, okay, how many terms of service do you do? What branch of service did you go into? Looking at, so I mean, I really can't say I have a preference, but I have a lot of fun with builds. Not that they're for every game, but I do like, for example, good cases, Marvel Superheroes game, which I just did recently. I tried to teach everybody through the random character generation for that. That is not something you want to do. Randomly generated superhero characters are ridiculous. And
we used to do that for Heroes Unlimited.
Absolutely nonsensical. And so a build process allows for a bit more of a focused character in there. But anyways, yeah, I like builds. I don't have anything against them, but I have nothing against randomly generated characters either. So,
right. So focusing on the random methods to begin with, and we're going to assume the D&D standard, certainly early version of the D&D standard, where the stats are random. The stats define what class and in some cases what race you can pick. and your choice of race gives you little modifiers, only small modifiers, plus and minus. What are the pros and cons of that method? And we're not going to go through each of the specifics. For example, in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, there were multiple methods, but we're just going to focus on
the default, right?
Yeah, we're just going to focus on the default of random. Now, for me, it's the unknown when you're creating a character. I like to create stats randomly. Yes, I do 4d6 rearrange, but obviously not every set of stats can be every type of character. So I like to see what they produce, what I can make with what they produce, and then come up with ideas for the character from that point onwards. So I will always generate the stats before I have an idea of what I'm going to play. Well, say 9 times out of 10. Obviously, you can pretty much play a fighter or a cleric or a magic user or a thief with almost any set of stats that you roll, because if you're rearranging. Other classes might be a little more unachievable, but some of my most entertaining characters that I've played have been ones where I've tried to justify something about their personality, their behavior, and their goals and the way they act, based on what stats I've produced, because I do like them to guide their approach in the game. I played a game, for example, once, and it wasn't me, but one of the guys in the group rolling 3d6 in order, playing basic D&D, rolled a 3 for dexterity, 3 ones for dexterity. He picked a cleric, and he decided that his cleric was going to have a fear of horses, because there wasn't a horse that he'd met that he hadn't fallen off because of his 3 dexterity. And little things like that can be generated from those stats and improvised, made up on the spur of the moment. And to me, that makes things interesting. Certainly in a game like, I mean, you'd argue that basic D&D and AD&D, your character's capabilities aren't that heavily dependent on the stats. I've seen characters with low stats survive a lot longer than high stats, because players have a habit of going gung-ho when they've got high stats.
Yeah, they think they're invincible.
Yeah. Anyone got any sort of difference of opinion on those, or anything you want to add?
Not so much a different opinion, as much as just adding on. You know, when you randomize, there's a certain mindset going in, right? Like I know people. I mean, I guess the downside of randomizing is if you have a fixed idea of what you want to play, it can be disappointing when you don't get it. And I've seen players, their energy just saps right out. They didn't get to be that ranger, or they didn't get to be whatever. So, I mean, it certainly helps if you go in with an open mind of, I'll play what I get, play the hand you're dealt, sort of thing. That definitely needs to be encouraged. So there's a downside there. But I ultimately, again, I guess it's preference, but I prefer that idea. It's like, oh, let's see what I get and see what I can work with. Modern editions are very much everybody's equal, everybody's special. So you start optimizing, and then becomes an arms race of who can optimize the best. Whereas for the old school and the random approach, you're still optimizing, but you're working with a more limited selection. No, we're geeks now.
We're geeks.
And there's more skill.
One of us is an old geek. But,
yeah,
well,
one's an
you
old
know
geek.
that. Yeah. But you're the same age as me, so you're an old
I'm
geek
older
as
than
well.
you.
by a month or two.
I'm still older.
Yes,
He's still the elder.
All that matters.
You're the granddad of the panel tonight, because I believe Mage's Musings is a year or two younger than both of us.
No.
Yeah, I'm hitting 50 in 6 weeks. So,
Yes.
but sorry, I'm a little rambly here. But yeah, I think that in the terms of optimization, when you're dealing with the card you're dealt, the hand you're dealt, so to speak, there's more skill involved in that optimization. It's like you could be taking, a subpar quote unquote character and really making him sing. And as you say, sometimes players get the god stats and they waste the character because they just they run into battle and they die because they think they're invincible. So I think there's a good element of being able to play the hand you're dealt, being able to play with what you got and going with an open mind, and that comes from the randomization and getting used to that.
Now, I'm going to throw something. Is this controversial? Is this going to sort of set a few touch paper, light
Yes.
touch paper? Possibly. I think being willing to accept whatever you roll is a sign of, I'm not going to say personal or mental maturity, but gaming maturity. The more experienced you become with games and the more familiar you become with all the game's options, the more flexible you become in terms of accepting what you roll.
I think that's true.
Yes.
I think that I think it also is. It generally would mean that you're more accepting also of the fact that you're playing a game.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we've talked about a lot of things, like the randomness in old D&D was very much the gaminess of it, which so is the death and the lethality. One thing that I mean, if I can talk to like things I like from random rolls, I mean, as an artist, I see random rolls, random stat generation as kind of an expression of the limited palette. That as it's already been said, but that can help generate your character idea, but it definitely helps me form a character when I'm randomly rolling, because and sometimes it's in unexpected ways. Like if I roll stats that are good enough to where I can pull off something like a high intelligence and a high strength, I just may make the muscle wizard. And I have made the muscle wizard. So,
or the Brainiac fighter.
Exactly.
Thank you, Hungar. Have you highlighted nobody here in big capitals? So, because we were nerds and then we were geeks, are we now nobodies?
Where's my wallet? I'm not having that.
Thank you, Hungar. But yes, you're right there. And I think certainly yes, it's a known and proven phenomenon that having a limited palette, those limitations, it breeds creativity.
I mean, I just watched a miniature painter today decide he created a fake scenario where he had to like speed paint his small little force and only allowed himself three colors to paint guys with skin and camouflage and weapons and everything, and they still came out great. I mean, they're better than anything I've ever painted with a $200 worth of paints. He did it out of 3 bottles, because
I just want to say
mix and match and get creative.
Just want to say hello, Squirrel. Squirrel, are you able to go home yet? There's something. It was on the news here, but you had to dig around for it. But that big fire in Ohio, squirrels had to be evacuated. His house is within a mile of where it happened, so hopefully Squirrel may be able to return home over the weekend. Excellent. Well,
all right, cool.
At least you're warm and safe, and that's what matters.
Right.
But yes, so there are so many instances of professional artists producing their best work with limited palettes. It's as simple as that, and I don't think gaming's any different. You were going to say something sexuous?
Well, I was going to come out with the contrapoints here, because yes, we all like the randomness. Yes, we all agree that if you're able to, as a player, accept that it's a game, you're going to get the hand you're dealt with. From my point of view, I still would not. I come at it from maybe the tactical point of view. If I'm a player and I look at the group as a whole and go, right, what have we got covered? What we need? What we get done? If I end up having stats that are disadvantaged for being the class that needs to fill the hole that I see within the group, and then the most optimal way for me to then play into the stats that I have is to then go for a different class. Then at that point, I then have to come in and go, right, we need to acknowledge that we either have a gap or we're going to have a subpar character of this. Because again, so go on.
I mean, that depends on the game you're playing. I mean,
We're sticking with D&D right now, and we're sticking with AD&D,
I would
which
argue.
we're all familiar with.
I would argue that if you're trying to fill a niche in a party, the way things are set up, to fill a niche, you only ever really have to have one of the 4 core classes. They all perform a specific role, and if you're doing 4d6 rearrange, you can do that.
Yes, and you can also get absolutely horrific rolls, and we all agree on that. And I've had 2 years of being with my Saturday game where I've had a player keep close tabs on what I roll when it's public, and he has come to the very cemented, concrete conclusion that I always roll below average. And that's also reflected in when I roll stats. I just have a terrible luck when it comes to random generated numbers, which is why I'm loved as a DM. Like, I really do try to kill you. I go out of my way to make sure you get one hell of a time. But the HP of the monsters, you're like my orcs and goblins, you're looking at 5 being like the most, top of the pecking order, like the most supreme one. Everyone else is like 1, 2, maybe 3. Pox-ridden, diseased, coughing up their lungs. That's the monsters you end up fighting when I roll for hit die. But where I'm going towards is that if, let's say, we've got the guy who wants to be a wizard, great, he goes for it. He goes straight, and we've got the guy who's the fighter, and we've got someone filling in for the thief, and I immediately go, right, well, we need a cleric for the divine magic that he can bring in, and turn undead. We need these things, and I roll just about a 9 for my wisdom, and then whoop-de-doo, we're going to have some wonderful disadvantages for when I come in and try to cast my spells, because now we're going to be looking at the percentile dice coming out every time I try to cast a spell, and then
even when you're rearranging the dice to suit, as in the highest stats.
Assuming you can rearrange it, yes, then
second edition.
I know
a lot
more. Go on.
Yeah. I mean, a lot. Second edition, the default is 3d6 in order. But most people I know, most people I know who've played second edition use the 4d6 rearrange for that as well. But
I'm with you. My point basically stands that you can still come out with some really subpar characters, and then this is where whether the DM is then going like, okay, well, you've got the highest is an 11. That's your captain below average, maybe, and even then it's sort of like, right. I'm just aware that mechanically there are going to be impacts from it, even if we do look at AD&D. And while we say there's not a lot of things, most of the things we're going to be rolling for is going to be based against the stats. So there's still a percentile impact for your success versus failure.
Depends on how you use stats in D&D. I mean, I can see.
My point is yes, we are all agreeing to the randomness and the enjoyment that we get of it. And don't get me wrong, I do. I mean, I'm going for the whole 3d6. Take it as you get it, and sure, rearrange them if you want to. But you're gonna get hit hard by life in my games, because that's how I run my games, and I'll take that same source and I'll go through it. I'll probably enjoy it. I'm just keenly aware that we are also looking at mathematically there are going to be impacts and consequences, and if a player is not willing to accept that, or if they're not a sadist like me, then this is
I mean, I'm going to say, when I'm running a game, if a player really doesn't like the first set of stats they roll, I allow them a mulligan. I will allow them a mulligan. And I've had players in the past dislike a set of stats because they've been too high. Certainly on one occasion, this one guy says, those stats are far too high for what I want to play. And he wanted lower stats. But I'll allow a mulligan. I mean, I only tend to be 1 in every 10 to 15 attempts that will get mulliganed, but I think allowing a mulligan is fair.
I'll throw in another, from the other side of the argument. Not all players get the creativity of, oh, I have a 7 dexterity. I was lamed when my character had this experience. They'll just look at it and go, oh, so I'm just clumsy. So I'm just bad at this. It's like, well, at that point, as a DM, if you've got that insight and that creativity, you can step in and go like, well, we can make it something else. You might have, let's say you've got, I rolled up a character who had 7 strength, 5 constitution, and I argued I should be a fighter because it was statistically speaking, it was the worst class I could have gone for. At best, I could have maybe been a thief, but I went for a fighter with the pure core concept that my character was a leopard first and foremost. The disease had ravaged his body so badly that his constitution being at 5, it was horrific. His strength was at 5, his constitution was at 7. He was ruined as a man. He was barely scraping along. He could barely carry himself, but he was such a devoted person of a specific faith that I effectively just played him as a fanatical Templar, and he then lived a very long and interesting life in the campaign I was in. Effectively, I played him as a paladin without any powers. It was the same moral code, the same divided, and it was a fun thing. I was just mechanically impeding, and I had to just go with, we need to consider me not a fighter, but as a tactician, and we're going to have to play it this way, because I at least had a above average intelligence, so I could argue I was well read, at least.
I mean, John makes a point here. 3d6 straight down the line doesn't really make much sense. If I'm weak and frail, I'm better off begging in town than exploring a dungeon. I would say that having something to contribute isn't 100% based on your stats. For example, having something to contribute might be a first level magic user who has the ability to cast sleep. His stats don't affect that. Or first level cleric in basic D&D can still turn undead. Okay, they might not be great in a fight, which is typically a cleric's role in low level basic D&D, but they can still turn undead, so they can still have something to contribute beyond just being a weak and frail individual.
Yeah, I think it's also, and I was kind of commenting to this in the comments, but it's important to think about what the base conceit of who adventurers were in older school games are, and there's plenty of examples in real life history of people engaging in high risk activity with very little in the way of skills or sufficient training or experience or equipment. We have tomb robbers, we have bandits,
There are
street thugs.
There are a number of World War II events where American soldiers who were technically not allowed into the army made it into the army and went on to become extraordinary warriors in the European theater. And that's just one of them. But to me, is the whole 3d6 is the fact that it suits. Again, I'm going to go back with 3d6 because that's what's being discussed here. In my worlds, I go by the whole idea of it's a shit life. You are probably of the lower classes in the social hierarchy. Adventuring is a wonderful way of escaping poverty, and it's a wonderful way of acquiring fame, wealth, and just perhaps even generally just sort of manage to sort of make something of yourself. And then 3d6 is a reflection that it's a hard life for many characters, and then often you are going to be seeing various things, anywhere from the pox having an impact upon your face, affecting your charisma, all the way over to tapeworms just making you constitutionally weak. And you can it's down to what world you want to run in. Because if it's going to be high fantasy, it does not make sense.
Hey, remember one of the most popular fantasy literature characters in modern fantasy was Raceland, and he's a sickly wizard who can barely stand.
Yes.
I mean, Elric he can't really function without drugs half the time. So
Even Frodo Baggins was a normal hobbit when he
every
set up,
hobbit in Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
Bilbo.
I'd argue that Sam had a little bit extra about him.
Well, he just had a high constitution and maybe a slightly higher strength.
I think with the exception of Frodo, they all became leveled character classes, whereas Frodo remained 0 level.
He was carried by everyone else. But
Yeah.
you need NPCs in the party. Sometimes they carry the spirit for everyone else.
I think the game mechanics as well help define what is considered to be an exceptional ability. Again, the difference between first edition AD&D and basic D&D, the fact that you get a +1 on your strength for 13 strength.
Mhm.
So it's clear in that 13 strength is considered to be above the baseline.
Because
and
that's
you could
assuming
argue,
the 3d6, because in the 3d6 spread, the average is the 9 to 12 range.
Yeah.
yes,
There was also a
Yes.
change. I mean, there was a general change within the company between the AD&D and then the third edition era onwards, but that was because of rebranding. Though it's if we should we stick with AD&D for this discussion, or are we trying to do a comparison?
Oh, it's just it's in general terms. I mean, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean,
Right, because there was a different value associated and a different mechanic. Because if we take just like AD&D, for example, we were looking very much, here's your stats, and these are going to be the core thing to represent your character's abilities to do things, perform feats, and just generally problem solving. That is what you deferred back to. Once we start moving into, you've got a 13, it was a mathematical calculation for how to view the stats at that point, because it was changed away from the bell curve that we were used to, where at the center we had from 8 to 12, or even 8 to 12, like 8 to 13,
10 and a
14.
half. 10 and a half is the peak. Is the peak
Yeah.
for 3d6.
Exactly, but you were looking at that sort of out there, where the very far fringes was where you then start having actual mechanical impacts to your character, for certain things, and that's sort of where you what we expected for AD&D. Whereas with third edition onward, they basically went, well, we're going to be going a little bit more numerical with these things, so the stats are going to have a bigger impact for what you're trying to do, and from there they then went on, and that's where the emphasis moved away from the stats, as in like the actual number that you had, and it became more focused towards the modifiers that they were giving to you, and that in that way it sort of moved a focus away from, I wouldn't exactly call it story, but it moved the focus away from the imaginative, creative ways of thinking of how you could just use or interpret a stat and then make your character perform said feat, whereas now the feats were predetermined and you now had to meet a number in order to acquire that. And it was a shift in just general way of the approach.
Approaching,
Yeah.
and there's also the philosophy of play too, whereas an older school was you're more grounded, you're more basic, you're closer to the average, whereas from third ed on they focused on, no, you are well above the average, you are the super, even at first level you are well above the normal person.
Yeah, they went to that adage, adventurers are something special. Yeah, as opposed to just being, Joe Schmo with his billy club.
And even in old school, it's true. Adventurers are special. You just had to earn it. You had to get a few levels, but you were still well above the norm. But a first level character is marginally above the average. A 0 level laborer has D6 hit points, whereas a first level fighter has D10, but they're still very similar. You could be 1 hit point with that first level fighter.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I do say that with
true.
the random generation, you're more inclined to get an opportunity to play those kind of baseline characters than you will with a point buy or with other systems. And I guess we'll kind of talk about that when we get there. But I've had some experience where I could not make the character I wanted to make with the game system I was playing because it required me to put too much on my character. Yeah, like I had to build X into my character or make X number of selections, and I'm like, I don't want a character that's that advanced to begin with. I'm trying to play a pretty normal guy, and the game won't let me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are certain game systems where, you're not encouraged to play normal. Later editions, 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, are very much power fantasy compared to the more grounded fantasy of earlier editions. Yeah. And I just want to, something I've seen it mentioned many times. It's something I've never played a character based on stats that I would have as a person. I wouldn't qualify to play a cleric with my stats. Not under AD&D rules.
Playing like that's a can of worms for sure.
I
would give myself a wisdom of 5, which means I would only qualify to be a thief, I believe, in the original rules. Which is fine, because certainly younger me had a fairly decent dexterity.
I don't agree with that, John, but I think you would have a higher wisdom because you have a degree of common sense.
You also have judo skills.
Wisdom. It's not just willpower, but it's common sense.
Too many snap decisions and too many bad decisions,
but it's also the general experience and ability to sort of look into situations and reading people as well.
Yeah, I know I have played games where I played 2 games where you're supposed to play yourself. One was Time Lords, which actually had a pretty involved system for determining what your ability scores were. Like, determine your strength by grabbing 2 gallon jugs of milk and holding them out here and count how long you can do it. Yeah. And it had like you go through all these things and then you jot down your stats. And then there was another one, I think it was Aftermath, that assumes you are playing your kind of yourself, because the whole idea is that you are all put in suspended animation until the fallout lifted, and then you got let out, but you're supposed to be playing regular people, and so they just say play yourself, and I didn't last long in the fallout.
I would say, I mean, there's always a bit of yourself in almost every character you make, because it is
by default.
It's difficult. Yeah, it is difficult to completely eradicate every aspect of your personality.
I went so far as to start playing almost all female characters for the longest time, because every guy character I would play would end up being way like me. It's just like too much like me. It's like, I mean, I need that barrier.
We do our best to push all up, but yeah, almost. I would say every character, but almost every character has always got a bit of you in it.
But we don't base the stats on how we perceive ourselves.
Well,
right?
yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, unless you are an absolutely fantastic method actor and you are able to really separate yourself out from the character there, well, one, you should probably be out doing proper acting. But 2, it's difficult to do because you are you, and putting yourself into that mindset. I mean, I've recently been in a customer service training where I had to do the whole role playing of being other personalities, and it's draining. Like switching on, like I'm not an overly aggressive person to confront someone else. I'm very much about, you have to understand why these things are happening. I'm very methodical in that sense, but having to like go out and then aggressively pursue a goal, that just had me knocked out. And that's just not the kind of energy that I want to put into my role playing, because like
anything else, it's a learned skill, right? Like acting is a skill. People train for it for years for a reason. And I've seen a lot of non-actors, as you say, it's draining on them to try to play a role. Because they haven't learned to sort of set aside themselves and just embrace, okay, what does this character want? And And remember, it does not reflect on you. And this is relevant in games too, because how many players take things personally? I tend to refer to this as avatar play, where they're an avatar of themselves in the game, but anything happens to them in the game, anything bad, they take it personally.
I've seen a player leave a game because their character died.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when I was trying to talk to him, he was just like, "No, he's dead. This was the character I wanted to play. I wanted to play him for a long time. Now he's dead. I'm just going to move on and find another game to play the character."
And it crushes them. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, "I'm sorry, what?" It's like, well, I tried to then ask, like, so resurrection, that's off the table. Like, what are we looking at here? Like, your character just cannot ever die? Is that like it was to me? It was confusing. But I also have a high body count, so it's like
Yeah. Before we move on to the next thing, this might stir up a few issues, but Shadows asked, how about playing a character that is the opposite of your sex? Why is there so much hatred towards it online? I've never seen why this is the case. In my groups, there's no issues with it. I've not had any problems with the people I play with in terms of their portrayal of members of the opposite sex. I've played with male players who play female characters. Sometimes, some of them more often than not. And certainly one of the women I played with, I remember her playing 4 characters in total over various games. 2 were male, 2 were female. And as long as your players have an adult approach to it, and by that I don't mean adult as in
yes.
as in
a mature approach.
A mature approach to it. There's nothing wrong with it. I think the opposition online tends to be from people who've had bad experiences either with very creepy people or very immature people.
I've certainly had the image. Go on.
And all it takes is one bad experience with someone who is that way to colour your judgment, to colour your opinions. I won't say colour your judgment, that's wrong, but colour your opinions. Because, you remember the bad experiences often a lot more than the good ones.
I mean, like I said, I played a lot of female characters, and the big difference between the way that I played them and what I heard from people who had bad experiences also was a lot of guys that play women, specifically that particular opposite, play women really dumbly. I mean, like, they just play them as kind of a weird fantasy kick. And I think that leaves a bad flavor in a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth.
There's certainly enough people in the hobby who have the social issues where they would, they would use and abuse that a little bit.
Now, on the flip side, when I've run into women playing men, I have not run into the same issue as much. No, I think there's a bit more social and emotional maturity. On the flip side of that, especially when you get to the younger gamers, a lot of us were probably doing this in our teens and 20s, and we're like, oh, I'm gonna play a girl. Look at my scantily clad, large, busted barbarian out there, and and that was how they played it. It's funny. One of my players, that one of the people I used to play with back in the day, was like, why do you always play women characters? I'm like, A, it helps me not play myself, like I mentioned earlier. B, because nobody else does. And the world isn't full of just adventuring dudes. Not even fantasy literature is full of adventuring dudes.
So here's a controversial question on topic here. I guess, Geek, you're the only one of us besides me who plays AD&D First Ed, right? You guys, Eli and Saxus, you don't play First Ed?
I have, but I don't now.
But you don't currently. Okay, so do you enforce the female strength limits?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. I figured it'd be a controversial one. People talk about how sexist it is.
I don't, but we ditched that way back.
My
mom was too much of a badass for me to accept that one.
I have other things I'd like to keep track of in my Excel sheets, like that's just not important to me. And at the end of the day, like I had a conversation with another DM where we were sitting and looking at a calendar we made where there were 36 months in a year, and we were sitting and trying to wrap our head around, 36 months in a year for that world. How old would that actually be? And I was like, we just don't get that concept of like time being stretched out that much. We can literally just make the world whatever we want. So yes, you can have the rule in there, sure, but I've just not seen why that should be brought in.
The way I see it is, yes, it is a clumsy way of bringing that sense of verisimilitude into the game world. It is a simple fact. It's something like 95% of men are comparable in terms of strength with the uppermost 5% of women. That is the level of difference. That is the level of difference. But the impact I've seen it have on a game is I've only ever seen one character be limited at the time of creation, because the only time when that limit is in place is at the point when the character is created. Those limits can be
circumvented.
Can be exceeded during play. It's only at the point of creation. And having, for example, human females, 1850, firstly, they have to roll an 18. Even then, there's only a 50% chance of them having rolled that 18, of then exceeding that limit. And to even get a chance to roll that, they have to pick a female fighter and put that 18 on strength. All of those need to be in place for that to happen. The impact I see when you have it in place is that players will tend, if they play a fight, if they roll an 18 and want to play a strong character, they'll play a strong male character. If they want to play a female character, they'll play a female thief, a female wizard, a female cleric. It doesn't reduce the number of female characters in the game. It just shifts the balance a little, the dynamic. So you get more of for example, the wise female cleric. And she's every bit as useful in the party as that strong human fighter. It doesn't change the balance of how many men and how many males and how many females are in the party. It just shifts the dynamics of the party slightly. And I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah, I found in practice, it's never come up. I don't actively use it. Yeah, I don't actively use it myself, but I found that even if it were to, it would just never come up. The women, it's a small sampling, granted, but the women in my games who do take warriors tend to favor dexterity based.
Yes,
they prefer builds. Yeah. One exception is my ex. She took a ranger and she maxed out her strength, but she got it up to 17, so it never came up. Right. So it's interesting. I was just it comes up online and people immediately react with the hatred. That's that's sexist, Gary Gygax.
It's one of those edge cases that always comes up in all of those discussions. They're like done in isolation. These arguments are generated in isolation without considering any kind of
context,
practical discussion or context. Mm-hmm. The only other reason that I ever kind of just threw it away, not only because just I've known very matriarchal family on my end, so never had any kind of hangups about that, was just mythologically and like in fantasy and in storytelling in general, it just seemed like not the sort of hill I wanted to die on. There's plenty of instances in folklore and fantasy where women are physically mighty also. So, it was just like, it wasn't the thing that really mattered enough to enforce. And to be fair, we also were a group that kicked out, racial level limits, and
Oh, those I adhere to wholeheartedly.
I know, but we thought
I
it was
do.
I'm a
dumb.
racist.
We thought it was dumb that an elf could live forever and
Somebody
never be
clip
as
that.
good a magic user as a human, you know. So, but yeah. So yeah, I've never really played with the limits. Although it's funny as I do like racial limitations, like because
I use the racial limitations for both class and
because a dog
attributes
and a
whatnot.
cat are not the same animal, and a chimpanzee and a
Yes.
gorilla are not the same. Even if we're comparing humanoids, I mean,
Um,
Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon were similar but not identical. So,
yeah.
And Neanderthal would be stronger than Homo sapiens.
well, and that's the thing. It's like we. Yeah, it's a silly argument. We're not. That's a different show.
Well,
It has nothing to do with character generation.
we are basically in agreement, and that's the main thing. Like for what's being said here, it's some will enforce the rule, others won't. That's sort of it. And there are reasons for it. There are reasons against it, and it's not. It's not a rule that was made with the intent of doing any form of harm to the players. It was just at the time it was made with a certain perspective of the world. Which
I mean, if you really want to talk about that, what was that one dragon issue that had female character classes? Remember?
Yeah, I've already covered that one, haven't I?
Yeah, no, you have, and that's why I bring it up. It's like, now there's some stuff that would probably get people a little bit more excited than just
Yes.
-1 to your strength.
Exactly, but end of the day,
People tend to use it as ammunition, though. That's the thing. I mean, I've seen so many people quote things like female characters had a strength penalty. They never had a strength penalty. It was purely a cap that hardly ever came into play.
Yeah.
Unless you were a female halfling fighter.
You'd have to be somewhat of a masochist to play a single class halfling fighter in AD&D anyway. It's as simple as that.
I'm just hearing my call here.
Anyway, we are now going to move. I mean, we've touched on the pros and cons there of random stats. I mean, certainly in D&D terms, random stats can give you more interesting characters. They can keep the classes that should, in my opinion, be special, keep them special. For me, they just typify the variety that exists in the world. They give you they because we're going to now come on to point buy methods, and point buy methods are completely the opposite. I absolutely detest pure point buy systems because there are a number of reasons. One, and this is the pedant in me, I hate the fact that 8 is now seen as being illiterate, weak, feeble, sluggish, hateful sort of characters, because 8 is the baseline everyone starts from. Having that -1, oh, my strength is terrible. It's 8. It's slightly below average. That is all.
I'm pretty sure I have strength 8.
Hmm?
I'm pretty sure I have strength 8. I'm not the mightiest fellow in the world.
The point buy is done exclusively for gamist purposes, so everybody would be equal. Everybody would start on the same footing, and it wouldn't be unfair that player A has an 18 strength, but player B has nothing higher than a 12. And I think there's a place for it, sure, from a game perspective, but it does diminish the roleplay potential, the roleplay possibility.
Yeah.
But also, we're talking about point buy in AD&D, not an actual pure point buy system.
Well, I
Because
think
everybody defaults to 8 or whatever.
Yeah, I know there is one stat generation where you start with 8, you roll 76.
Yeah.
The results on that specific die is what you then add to the stat, and then you build it up from there. It's still generated that we only really saw point buy become a thing from 3rd edition onwards, where it was geared towards a more mathematical game than it was in AD&D. even in second edition, it's not exactly. I've only had one player who advocated very hard for using the Start with 8, Roll 76, but that's because he prefers very high fantasy. He wants to go straight in for that. He wants to have the highest stats. He wants to have all of these things because he wants to have his character reflect, being a super powered, very competent character in that sense. But that's the preference that he's going for, and that's fair. That's also why I prefer going the other way.
I mean, to me, Point by it produces a blandness. How many wizards do you now see in games of D&D who have 8 strength? How many fighters and barbarians do you now see who will have 8 intelligence?
So that
and
is
so
also
on.
So that is also down to the fact that we've had more gamers, more players coming into this hobby since 3rd edition onwards, making that the norm to them. Therefore, so that just preface that, okay? So in their head, they are
The system
already
enables
started.
that. The system enables that, though. The system actually encourages that.
But I think I think what he's trying to say is, though, the perception of the game is different now because
Yes.
we are the old folks who played it one way before, but to the current crowd, there's never been anything different.
Like what we do when I sit and explain that to my real life group, and I explain to them how AD&D runs, they are usually amazed by the concept that rather than having a modifier to your stat, you roll a d20 and you want to get equal to or less than your stat for success. And they then have a lot of questions like, what about skills? What about these things? And the usual answer is, well, the skill is down for how you argue using that stat for this thing. And
I will tell you this: you want to break people with point buy and or standard array. I'm sure we'll get there at some point. Show them what kind of characters you can get through rolling 4 dice 6 and a range. 4 dice 6 drop the lowest and a range. You're going to get, on average, more interesting and dynamic characters and potentially more powerful characters with that method than you
on
are
average,
with the point
slightly
buy.
more powerful.
Yeah.
On average,
I'm gonna
Unless you're
grab a
Saxius.
book here. I'm gonna grab a book here to argue why you would need point buy, because there are certain systems where if you don't use a point buy, you will not be having fun to begin with, and it's not because you need to have a certain form of like arms race, but it's not because it's you versus the DM. It's because as you are progressing in this game, the things you are going to be fighting against, there is just no mercy at that point. It just gets to the point of where if you are not, if you have not been investing into your character at this level, then your character will die, and it's going to be a party wipe. And I'm not. Let me just grab it.
Well, while he's doing that, let me. I mean, I guess the question then comes: is point buy in general bad, or is just point buy in D&D a bad thing?
Well, yeah, it really has to go with the system.
Because some game systems it makes perfect sense. Like superhero games with point buy that's real. That's totally reasonable because there's so much variety. Yes, Inquisitor.
I've got more of them, but the point is, in these games, it's the D100 system, and you get XP as you level up. That XP you invest back into your character. And although they start off by saying, oh, here's how you can roll for your stats, that will have a very big impact for your character, like from the beginning all the way through. If you are a psycho, aka a mage, and you've got a low willpower, which is your ability to just fuse out, magic, if that's low, you're going to have a hard time creating the spells to begin with, and worse yet, you're going to have a hard time resisting magic against you, and that can even lead to things like your character becoming possessed, and that's not going to be a fun for you, the group, or anyone else. So in that situation, a point buy is practically necessary, because you are in a setting where these things will happen, and you are in a system where, as you are progressing upwards, these are going to be things you're going to be facing, because it is assumed that as your character levels up, you become more competent, and the threats that you uncover and the conspiracies that you find suddenly changes and becomes a lot more dire.
Is that because those systems have a heavy bearing on the character's stats during play?
Yeah, because you do everything with your stats,
Right.
your combat ability. I mean,
Because in D&D you
spa-
don't. Not everything comes from the stats.
yeah, but
As much comes from the class.
it's basically so ingrained that everything that you do is based on those stats, but maybe not to the same extent by D&D, because in D&D you can argue, oh, I might want to use this, or I want to do a combat, and then combat is almost separated out with a few benefits from some stats, but otherwise it's separated out into its own thing. But there are other systems where the stats have such a core part that point by just it becomes the de facto you have to do it this way, or you're going to be taking on some serious impacts. But bringing back this for as well, this is also where you're then suddenly going to have things like life paths having a very big impact, because then that will also impact your attributes and your core stats for that.
So I mean, they're not pure point by then if they've got life paths involved.
There are life paths, but they would be the equivalent of you get a plot. So D100 system, so it might be you are from a background of nobility. You get a +5 in this, but then that's it. And then once you've done all of that, you have your pluses, your minuses, and then you go through and you do your point by thereafter. And then there are going to be adjustments according to that.
Yeah, in my experience, most life paths tend to tweak characters rather than make them, or determine skills more than attributes.
Yeah.
They can do. They can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've not played a lot of life path games. It can be argued that Shadow of the Demon Lord has the life path element to it,
I would argue
which I'm going to be coming to in a bit. But and I don't mind it in that sense, because in the way that Shadow of the Demon Lord is working, it's fine. One point I do want to make, where people argue in favor of point buy, and people sometimes say that they're happy rolling random stats for one shots or short term games, but they would never use random stats for a long term campaign.
Yeah, those are character builders that are probably more in favor of point buy.
I'm completely the other way around. I haven't got a problem with having fixed or point buy type stats for a one shot. I'd much rather have rolled stats for a campaign.
Well, yeah, because you're somebody who likes to kind of develop their character out of what you get and then build from there. But a one shot, you don't have that, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
I mean, you
just give me the
probably
character and I'll run it. Yeah.
Yeah, for a one shot character, I don't care how we got it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
For a one shot, I don't even want to make the character. I want
you
it
could have
handed
just
to me.
sneezed it out, and I would I would play it.
So I mean, that's it's obviously it's that different mindset that it's coming from the building or the sort of organic development type mindset. There's two. I'm in the organic development camp in terms of characters, whereas people are there in their build, their crunchy mechanical build.
Well, the builds also, I mean, they favor the players who have the grand idea. They're the ones who come to the table with the 5-page backstory. They want to play the one they want to play. And that's a style of play. Fair. I just
or as you were mentioning earlier, the very gamist people
the gamers too, yeah,
who come there and they're like they're gonna win D&D.
Yeah.
But I mean, on the topic of point buy, I love point buy in other systems. I mean, sometimes the point buy character generation is more fun than the game itself. The hero system, that is lots of math. And it gives you ultimate control over your character's powers and abilities. That's really fun. Like envisioning your character as a set of building blocks and then forming out of a mechanic and the points you're spending this idea of your character. I mean, it's very much like almost like a sculptor's mindset, whether it's additive or reductive sculpting, where you're like finding the sculpture in the marble or lumping on clay. Either way, you're getting that that formed character. And I think in the context of like a superhero game, which is what Hero is, I mean, it's all sorts of things, but originally it was Champions. The cohesion you get and the control over the concept that you get with a point buy is important in that kind of context, because superheroes generally are very cohesive kinds of character creations. You know, I mean, if you think about even Peter Parker, um, as Spider-Man, he's still a contrivance from the point he was created. He's even though his origin is all full of happenstance and all of that, the character itself only works because somebody decided that it has all these parts working together. So I think in a game like where of high theme, like superheroes, point buy is really good. It's a good way to do it.
I'm
Probably the best way to do it.
I'm good. Yeah, I mean, contradicting what I said earlier, regarding the randomness, yeah, in terms of your typical D&D fantasy type game, randomness all the way. But I mean, I played a fair bit of Marvel superheroes when I was a kid, and we did dabble with the character creation. Most of the time, we played the pre-gens, the standard heroes, your Avengers, your X-Men, or what have you. But we did dabble with that random character creation system in there. And something you said earlier,
ridiculous.
You could come up with some absolutely nonsensical superheroes.
If that's the fun you want to have, great. But like last night, we had not last night, but last Monday when we were doing the character generation, we had one character who had ice generation, but was a plant, but also had energy absorption and all this. And yes, you can kind of use some of that limited palette mentality of like, oh, cool, I can start forming these together, and you can kind of pseudoscientific bullshit your way through how they all fit together. But PSB only goes so far, and at the end of the day, I'd much rather have an idea of how to build my character. I'm also a huge fan of point buy systems that allow the purchase of disadvantages and flaws.
I mean, what was the game we played which had that? Deadlands. Deadlands had some of that in it. And that was all right. I picked a flaw for my character which gave me an extra bonus somewhere else. And being primarily a role play type player, I role played that flaw to the hilt. I pushed this sort of quite how what's the word? Morbid the character would be, how aware he was of his own mortality, because the flaw I picked was that he had a disease that would kill him sooner rather than later.
I think the most ridiculous example, if I can share an anecdote here, of random character generation in Marvel superheroes was when we first started playing in 1984. My friend rolled up his first character, rolled that he had one power, and his power was that his powers couldn't be taken away.
Now, I would argue that,
on the other hand, the example of how absurd point buy can be, to this day, my brother still can't remember the power that he actually gave. He made one character for Champions that was so convoluted in the construction of all, because in Champions you can like only works on such and such day, and is this kind of limitation and stuff. He had all these limitations for this really powerful power. He can't even remember what it was, because it was just so obscure the way he had to build it. So it can go both ways.
I'd say having some random element would work in Marvel superheroes. But I think they should have had it so that your general main power you could randomly determine, and then maybe have some a tree where you roll things that were associated with it.
And that's kind of what we ended up doing. I mean, my cure for that, for example, was go ahead and roll your character randomly, just like you're normally supposed to. And they did have some guidance. Like if you're a mutant, you had some modifications to your final outcome, as opposed to if you're an altered human or whatever. And so what I would have them do is randomly roll their abilities. And then at the end of it, I'm like, okay, you can drop a power to get a bump in the power level of one of your other powers, and that way they could refine it down to something that was a little bit more cohesive. But even that's a fix, a weird pinch.
Yeah.
The main issue with point buy, if I could real quick while we're talking about superheroes, and I've mentioned it before in a few streams, is if you get two people at the table who have vastly different levels of experience with that game system, the advanced player is going to be able to get so much more out of that point buy than
Yes.
the newbie. I mentioned
Point
the guy
buy, and point buy encourages that. It encourages the theory crafting.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
I used to play with a guy with champions who could get double the point value out of it compared to anybody else that was in the game because he'd been playing it since the game came out.
So it's a point buy encourages the rules lawyers, the theory crafters, the rules lawyers, those who look for
And it's-
every little advantage.
And it's definitely a system, a mechanic that can be mastered. And that's the thing, whether it's even if you're not a power gamer, if you're just good at it because you've been doing it a while, then you're naturally
Where's
just going to
Omanal?
get more out of it.
Where's Omanal when we need him?
Was that?
Well, he's a
Rules
recovering
lawyer.
power gamer, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
But he likes it though, because there's enjoyment in it, in finding a way to sort of, either break the system or just optimally use it to your advantage. Because at the end of the day, you are, well, depending on the player, most power gamers I've come across, they just really want to overcome whatever problem is coming their way. It's just like, throw things at me. I'm built to like just dig or come over whatever it is that's coming my way. So that's what they want to go for. And it's fair enough.
You can have power gamers for good, just like you can
Yeah.
have rules lawyers for good. Yeah.
You go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I always try to categorize myself as a good rules lawyer. I will try to remind the DM of the rule. I will even come out and give suggestions for how it can be interpreted, but I always tell them their words is law, and if they tell me to stop talking, I will stop talking, because I'm not here to slow down a game. That is detrimental. I might poke them after the game and go, so I want to check in on this, and this, just to make sure that either A, you were confident in it, or two, that you are happy with the ruling, because I might have a perception of it.
Cheers, Ian.
Yes, this is bred from points buy, and there are benefits from having such. How do I describe these people? That it includes myself. Interesting characters who will come in with almost encyclopedic knowledge, because as long as they can contribute for the betterment of the group.
It's how you use that knowllege. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the problem for me is there are too many people out there who use that knowledge to try and for one-upmanship, rather than for enhancing the group dynamics.
Exactly. Anyway, with that said and done, are you happy with what we've discussed? Or?
I'm going to say that another thing that Point Buy has done for me, going back to D&D, is it has made those classes that were special in the early editions, that I have this nostalgia about about them being special. It's ruined that. Now anyone can be a ranger, anyone can be a paladin, anyone can be a druid, anyone can be a bard, because you just place the points to make it. And to me, that is it's taken away that sort of the magic of those classes. The magic of those classes came from their rarity as much as anything, and it's annihilated that, taken it all away. And I can't forgive Point Buy for that. Personally, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on that end, yes, it has made certain classes which were otherwise, there was a barrier of entry for being said class, but there was also some restrictions that came with said class. Just look at paladins, their alignments, and rangers and their alignments, and what their requirements were in terms of their ethos, and everything in between. There were certain barriers that came to it. You could almost argue that it also made it more accessible. It's not like what defined said character was taken away. Rangers are still Rangers. It's just now more people have the accessibility of playing them.
They're now 2 a penny, though. That's the thing.
Well, it's almost also down to like what kind of game are you running? Because if you're running a wilderness survival game in AD&D, and you don't have access to a ranger, well, guess what? Your hunting is suddenly going to have a -7 penalty from the get-go. Before you even roll, that's a -7 penalty.
Better save those pennies to hire a retainer.
Exactly. I was about to say that. But yeah, get hiring. The town will have somebody who can act as a guide. You better make sure you've got someone with a bit of charisma who can persuade them to help you, or some pennies.
And that is, again, well, that's specifically Wani speaking right there. Because I'm thinking also perhaps maybe of 3.5 and onwards, where Rangers were a lot more prevalent, but then they still came out with the whole thing shine of, well, we are the Rangers, we are here for the guidance, and it's therefore just meant to be assisting with the players overcoming various things.
In 5e, there's a lot more bleed over of skills too. So you can have, like, well, for example, in the game I'm running, we got a barbarian who he's effectively a poor man's ranger, and he serves that purpose. Right. Now, an actual ranger class has obviously perks, but but it's less of a deal. I mean, but yeah, when we go back to first ed, when everybody's very specific in their skill set, not having that woodsman when you're on a wilderness adventure, like I said, better be able to afford to hire that retainer.
Yeah.
But as the game, in my idyllic world, as I think the game should be played, such a party would focus on the dungeons, the castles, the ruins, and wouldn't go out poking in the wild until they found a ranger type who could help them. And for me, that's a benefit of the system rather than a penalty.
See, I'm on the opposite spectrum because I want my players to go across the plains, over the hills. I want them to go out exploring the regions. For me, it's not about, dungeon over there, go in, go down, 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 up, 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 and then back home.
I think it should depend on the makeup of the party. It's down to the players, what characters they create, what characters they have available to them. And I think it feels more organic that way.
Well, that's one of the challenges. Sorry, Zach, just go ahead.
Go on. No, you go on.
I was just about to say that's one of the challenges of the game is what are our limitations, identifying your team's limitations, rather than just being able to say, okay, let's make a character who's a ranger, let's make a cleric, deliberately flesh it out. It's like, no, everybody makes the character they want to play. And then part of that is overcoming, okay, we need a thief or we need a ranger, and figuring out how to fill in those gaps. That is part of the game as well. And I think that shouldn't be understated.
Absolutely. Though, I mean, I think it's also a difference in, just DMing preferences. I mean, John, you like your dungeons, you like the older one style of, go here, explore this, go as deep as you can, come back out, ideally get as much treasure as you can out of there, because that also equivalates into XP, so forth and so forth. Mm-hmm. I very much go for the style of, here is a big map and you're going to go exploring across it. You might not even go into a dungeon. You might just be exploring a few ruins over here and there, but it's going to be other adventures you're going to be having instead that I then run. But then that's also down to, I know at least when I have to sit down and explain to my group what I do, this then also becomes a factor I try to push on to them, because when they roll for their stats, that's to me becomes a very important part, because this is where them as a group have to sort of go like, okay, well, we know what the DM style is. Well, how do we want to go about this style? How do we want to enjoy this? And what kind of composition and what kind of layout are we going to have for that? It's a bit off topic from the character creation, but I think it still brings it back in the sense of the group, from my perspective, really needs to communicate with one another what they want out of the game. I mean, the stats generation is definitely important for that, but the characters that they're going to be building
I mean,
thereafter.
this topic isn't just stats generation; it's character generation. So
I know it's
yeah,
character
yeah.
generation, but like, the important part for me really is because team building is a primary one for me, and I
don't disagree. I think
Yeah.
it's a key part of the game where I think the players should always get together when they make their characters and think about what they're creating. Think about the dynamics of the party they're putting together. Think about how the characters would know each other and work together, and think about the style of game they want to play when they're doing so, and communicate that with the DM. It's a two-way thing. We all want our players to enjoy our games, and we all hope that our players want to make it enjoyable for us as well. You could argue there are plenty of players out there who don't want that, and there are some DMs out there who probably shouldn't be DMing if they don't want that sort of approach. But
How dare the DM want to have fun?
It's all part of the character creation process, as far as I'm concerned. Getting everybody together, getting everybody on the same page, and working out what works.
Absolutely.
Though I will, if I'm playing a D&D type game, I will always lean towards some form of randomness in there because I want it there.
I want it, yes, precious.
I want it, yes, precious. But anyone got anything more to say about point buy before we move on to?
Yeah, one thing.
Yes, fight the power.
This book, although it says you can do point buy, we wholeheartedly discourage you from doing it. So that's a big thing in Shadow of the Demon Lord for when it comes to character creation. They you can do it. They give you a way to do it, but they also tell you like that's not the focus of this game.
No.
So that's why when you make character in that game, it's a very specific way.
And to be fair, in regard to point buy, even in D&D, I'm all for a game system that gives players options to play it the way that they want to play it.
Yep.
I am not a huge fan of this game is, and that's it. There are ways to play games, and even before games were given the flexibility and the freedom that they are in their rules, people were already playing those in different ways and exploring those. I mean, point buy is not new. There's a Dragon article out there about point buy that predates 3rd edition. So we're not looking at newfangled, hippie ideas. We're looking at concepts and ideas that have been there all along. It all comes down to different ways that people want to play. And so for a rule book to present those options, I think is better for getting people to play the game and to grow the hobby, because everybody has different wants and desires. Point buy may not be for you and me, but if it gets some people playing D&D, awesome.
And ultimately, not every DM is suitable for every group, and not every group is suitable for every player. It is all about finding the sort of group and finding the sort of players that play a game that you will enjoy as a DM. In my opinion, you've got to have that. The Venn diagram has to have somewhere where it meets in the middle. I mean, that's why. I mean, I don't run a lot of systems. I probably run 5 or 6 different systems to a degree of competence. And I will say now, I won't run a point by D&D game. If that's what my players want, I don't get any enjoyment out of that. So the game won't be fulfilling for me, and thus it won't be fulfilling for them.
Furthest I've flexed has allowed somebody to do standard array because they didn't want to bother rolling. I'm like, okay, well, you can choose to underpower and hamper your character if you want, but
yeah,
because everybody else is plenty happy. Because all my old school players are like, I'll roll 46, drop the lowest.
And that leads us nicely into standard stats, fixed stats, and stats that then develop during character creation, but not in a point buy manner. Or during play. And Shadow of the Demon Lord comes into this, where we're all goblins. We all started off with the 0 level goblin stats, which were 8 strength, 11
Getting it up,
dex, something like that. We all started with the same stats.
Yeah.
But in Shadow of the Demon Lord, you go down different sort of profession paths in it as your character gains levels.
Yep.
And for example, I chose to go down the rogue path, and that meant that my dexterity started going up. Whereas Gingerbeard has gone up with the
everyone are thieves. Everyone are thieves. You're all thieves. Actually,
I didn't know we'd all picked thieves.
I think everyone is going down the route of being more thief-like. Maybe one, I think it was Harry, might have gone down a warrior path at the end of the day. But the general idea is behind Shadow of the Demon Lord is your character starts off at level 0. And that comes with a pre-made set of stats. So for goblins, you've got a strength of 8, agility of 12, intelligence of 10, and a will of 9. The way that you calculate that is your stat minus 10. That's your modifier, and that's it. Those are the 4 stats you're going to be using throughout the entire game. As you then progress and you gain up in levels, the next rank basically becomes you'll pick what class you want to be. And they usually say increase any stat to a maximum of 2. So you get 2 points you can give out once, or you can get 1 stat that increases by 2 points, and you can then choose that. But it's encouraged for you to go in accordance to how you play your character.
Yes.
And from there,
it's got an organic feel to it.
It's very organic.
And I'm on board with that because it feels natural. It feels as if, I mean, I think, do you remember me saying I had a choice at one point? I had a choice of where to put my stat points, and I said to you, well, I've been doing things like this, so that point will go there. I've been also doing this, so that point's going to go there. I based it on what my character had been attempting to do.
You see that in my answers and responses on the Friday night Fighting Fantasy. I'm usually like, we can't trust those guys. Here's my selection. When it comes to the book,
Yeah. But then on the other side, in terms of all the randomness and life paths that we've then also been discussing, just using goblins, they've got roll 3d6, and then the result of that is going to determine your age as a goblin. You will have distinctive appearances as a goblin. There aren't habits. Some of them are a lot more crude and won't be mentioned here. Backgrounds and so forth. And then it goes into and then it goes into the.
Some of them will get us demonetized.
Yes, some of them will. And then you go into things like the professions, and it's a simple D6, and then you can either become an academic, a commoner, a criminal, a marshal, a religious person, or a wilderness person. And then from there, it's just, the floodgates open up for what you can become. There are 20 options for each of that, and it just continues from there. It's so much more about you building a character, as in fleshing out their background, getting a feel for them, building a sort of persona that you could slide in nicely.
There wasn't a lot of building involved, which is what I liked about it. What it was is you got this random table, you rolled the dice, and it gave you little quirks, little things that had happened to you, things that had shaped you, things that made you a little bit different.
Yeah.
And it was then up to you as a role player to work out how it all fitted, how it all gelled together, and how it all makes a character. And so it's still got that random element to it that makes it satisfying for me, that inspires me. I wouldn't want to look at those tables and pick something from them. I like the idea of roll something and make that work.
Exactly. And it usually does work because, if we're going to specifically use our game, we've picked the players have decided to just be as zany and off the rails as possible. And Elf, you've had the enjoyment / misfortune of sitting in on one of these sessions and just hearing at how the players all playing goblins just went, Here's all the quirks that we have. Here's how we're all absolutely weird. Here's how we're disconnected from the rest of society, and why we all believe that we have to argue with people that they are actually dead, and it's our job to convince them that they're dead. Ergo, we are the Undertakers, except we sort of predetermine who is and isn't.
It's also
Dead.
safe to say that a well-designed game that has elements like that is going to make them all playable.
Yep.
You know?
Yes.
It's badly designed when you have elements of that character generation that create nothing. And of course, that's a sliding slope. Some people are going to get more out of, insignificant little personality traits than others. But yeah, there are a lot of systems that, for example, you can really abuse based on what you select or what you roll up. So,
And one thing, and another thing, saying with Shadow of the Demon Lord, one thing that I'm enjoying about it is that it's a fixed level, a fixed length of campaign.
Yeah.
We've got these random elements. Yes, it is zany, but it's just the right length of campaign to keep these elements fresh, to keep the zaniness interesting. If it went on for like 6 to 8 months and character development was fairly slow, it would probably get quite stale. But it doesn't, because of the way that it is set in such an episodic way.
Pretty much. That's the idea behind it. Anyway, I think we need to allow Omen to quickly
Yes.
jump in and tell us, why we need to numerically crunch all the numbers and get the most highest number, 18 down the line. We will accept nothing less.
Were your ears burning when we were talking about Power Gamers earlier and point buy?
No. I
like
missed
that?
the Power Gamer part. You were just talking about random versus points. There are sometimes I like points. I think World of Darkness does a very good job of it.
Yeah.
That's an excellent one. Because I'm not worried. Characters can't claim, oh, well, you just rolled well, that's why you're doing so much better. It's like, well, where do you put your points? And it allows you to distribute them over a large area. That said and this is the problem from a DM standpoint, unless you already have a character creator, is I don't want to sit there for hours and hours while everyone tries doing all that. And I think that's the negative part. And of course, we'll all joke about drinking for Conan, but the whole thing was, this is one of the reasons why I like the Conan character creator. Select, boom. And what I really like about that kind of character generation is players, unless they're power gamers, don't have to think. They're not limited by paralysis. But everyone gets the same number of points. Actually, get the same number of points, the same number of talents, the same number of stat, totals. All of those totals are the same. But
we haven't mentioned analysis paralysis, to be honest, but that does come into that does come into point buy. It does
well, it comes into life path too. Sometimes it's like, well, what am I going to pick? But this one's awfully easy. Okay, you get to pick 6 choices. You're not thinking 4 levels down. It's like, oh, okay. And then it gives you like a little short paragraph, and you can fill that in for your character creation. And that's one of the things I do like about it. And the characters are relatively balanced. The other part I like about it is I don't feel any character I've ever created in that, even if I put all random, ever feels useless, which I think can sometimes happen.
That is one of the selling points that they put into Conan, though, is that completely random characters almost are it's a design of the system. It's a feature of the system that completely random characters will still always come out as something playable and worthwhile.
And it amazes me. It's hard to make one that can't. I mean, I think you have
everybody I've heard talk about the game system mentions that, and I was doing some reading on it, and that was built in. That's an intentional design choice. So.
But it allows you to go in all sorts of different directions for that. Yeah. I mean, sometimes when people talk about Traveler, you roll it. Well, one person can be great for this one thing, and the other person can just get bad roll after bad roll after bad roll, and that's fine if you enjoy it. But that's sometimes when we talk about character creation, is I like it where it can build up the story, but I also like characters to be somewhat close relative strength. That was one of the things that I know when you guys were talking about purely random. Oh, it doesn't matter about the stat. It does and it doesn't. Depends on where you fit in the power curve compared to everybody else. If it's great if everyone's pretty close, but man, if you are getting way out there, if your highest stat is a 15 and everyone else's stats are in like the 17s.
Well, that does bring up something that I forgot. I didn't think of this when we were talking about random. The randomness adds to the replayability of the game.
I
Because
don't.
every time you go in, you're going to have a different mix of characters. And it's again kind of goes back to that old school mentality that it was a game and not an experience or a lifestyle or whatever. And it was a game, and so that replayability, it's kind of like, in other game terms, roguelike computer games. The replayability is that yes, you may end up fighting the same monsters and the same route, going through the same rooms, but you're going to go through them in different orders, and every time you go through, it's going to be different. So that randomness does allow you that, and because there are 6 attributes, across 6 to 8 players in those old games, that random spread is pretty variable. So.
Well, and I agree with that. If you don't have as many modifiers as it depends on the kind of modifiers, pluses and minuses. And I know that Saxy's talking about, your negatives. It's fine if everyone has the niche, which again is the niche protection. I think it works fine for that. But if you're kind of the second or third fighter in the group, well, what are you going to do that's different than everybody else when everyone else kicks ass? You're like, so I've seen that aspect. The I would like to mention one that's kind of a combination of is if anyone has looked at the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, where you start creating the characters, you go in there and you can select or you can randomly roll. If you randomly roll, you get more experience. So it allows players to decide on which way do they want. It's like, well, if I select, do I roll my race up randomly, or do I just let it go through? Oh, by the way, you get extra experience points if you roll up randomly. Well, maybe that's worth it. And I think that's another aspect that's kind of good about that. I know it can get kind of swingy there, but unlike D&D, in certain cases, your stats can go up over time. So I think that helps balance out. So that's one of the other things is can you balance those out. I'll tell you the worst one that I've dealt with, I guess if you're going to do, some of the hero creation, and if you do Shadowrun Karma buy, just shoot me. Just shoot me. Yes, I can do that. And if you have to be a game master and you have to deal with that and make sure that everything works out, oh God, no. Well, so actually, I don't know if you do the Karma buy or if you just do the regular point buy in Shadowrun. It has the priorities and then the points from there.
Yeah, I remember that. I haven't played Shadowrun in 30 years, but yeah.
I've never played Shadowrun. I don't know anything about its character creation systems.
well, you do an A, B, C, D, or an E, and so depending on what race you have, what attributes, your skills, whether you have magic or not, and money, and those all determined in there. And go ahead, John.
The current Cyberpunk Red has a cool fusion version of that. It's a point buy for attributes and for skills, but it's also determined you're preset at the beginning of the game what level of character in the story you are. Are you all background characters? Are you supporting characters? Are you main characters? And you can even mix it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go through a life path after you have your abilities, which then modifies your skills and your abilities.
I'm going to say one other thing about point buy when it comes to 5e that I don't like is all the characters tend to feel very similar in certain cases because you're going to go, okay, I'm a fighter. I'm going to take strength or dexterity. Okay, I'm going to do this. And
that's something I brought up when we were discussing the point buy. Yeah.
The same thing happens with standard array.
I'd like to have some more variety in there, and the old, I guess basic. You drop 2 in one stat, you can raise another stat by 1. I was like, oh, okay, that way you can excel if you want to, and you just are really bad at others. But I like it when it has a range. I just wish that it was a little bit more less on either
pros
end.
and cons are nice. Like I like when there's a balance. It's like, hey, you can have this advantage, but you got to give something up.
Yeah. I mean, I said with my Deadlands character, I got myself an extra little bonus somewhere by taking on a character flaw, a major negative, but that gave me something to really get my teeth into when I was role playing the character. In that the character I played had this sort of permanent sort of malaise over him because he knew he was dying. And I didn't actually know a lot about the game when I first created the character, and I didn't realize that the idea was that characters that die will often come back as undead because that's the way the game is meant to progress. So when my character, I'd got this idea in my head when I was playing the character that at the start of every session you roll dice, and if you roll badly, then whatever the flaw I had about my disease, if I rolled badly, it meant it had taken a step for the worse. It had become pretty much the decline had set in. So when that started happening and it started spiraling downwards, I decided that my character, when we got to the big sort of boss thing at the end, he would sacrifice himself, knowing that he probably only had months to live, for everyone else to succeed. And thus he'd be seen, despite all his flaws and all the things he'd done wrong in the past, because he was a bit of an outsider who'd got a bit of a past about him. He would be seen as being a hero. It would have righted all those wrongs. What I didn't realize was that he would then rise from the dead as a zombie afterwards. I didn't know. I hadn't read enough about the mechanics to know that. So that sort of changed the feel of it. But I had told the DM before the session that was my plan, but the players knew nothing about it. So when he marched into the enemy base and detonated what he was carrying in order to get it into the best possible point, everyone was like, "What? Mix killed himself. He sacrificed himself." And it was just like this big sort of, at that moment. And it was a big moment. But then at the end of the session, he was brought back in because, of course, he was now a zombie. But no, we were playing Deadlands with the, what rule set was it? It was the standard. What's the standard rule set that Deadlands works under? What's the name of it?
Savage World?
Savage Worlds, that was it.
Originally, it was its own system.
Yeah, this was Savage Worlds. This was Savage Worlds Deadlands. I liked it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I do like a Wild West setting. So yes, Shadow, that was the version I was playing. Savage Worlds, yes. I played Maple Leaf Mick, who was a huckster.
From Canada. Maple Leaf.
He came from the border, though it didn't really matter in the sense of that world. But it was because he used to wrap his chewing tobacco in maple leaves that he soaked in whatever strong liquor he could get hold of to impart flavour.
No,
so the leaves were so...
Envisioning you trying a Canadian accent.
the leaves say an awful lot, but
you take off.
But the idea was that chewing tobacco is what had led to him having terminal throat cancer, and that's what was slowly getting worse.
Well, can I mention something about character creation, which I've noticed that the faster the character creation, the more lethal the game can be without feeling like people have been cheated.
Oh yeah,
that's true. That's true.
I mean,
the one reason nobody wants to die in 5th edition is because it takes you a week to make a character.
Yeah,
without D&D Beyond.
Well, I mean,
my 5e game is fairly lethal. We've had probably 8 player character deaths, and I tell people, have your backup ready to go. And they're lollygagging about it. Oh, I haven't done my backup. And the player died. Oh, I guess I got to finish my backup. Yeah, I guess you better.
Well, and the OSE is so easy. It's it's just like here, roll a character up in like 5 minutes. The biggest thing that takes you is to get equipment.
It's pretty fast if you roll 3 on that money.
Well, I mean, just 3d6 straight down. Like, oh, okay, go. Well, even with the money, most of the time it's like, what do you do? You already know your weapons and your armor. You're kind of like, oh, okay, I got this, and this. Okay, I mean, you can kind of create a beast. Yeah, but that's the thing that I think whenever we talk about character creation, whenever we talk about stats and everything, let's not forget your other characters, which I think we talked about this on Sunday or Saturday. A ship is a character if you're going to play a sci-fi game. And now that's a whole other one that you're going to have to create.
Well, heck, I mean, in the one of the Game of Thrones RPGs, your house was a character.
Mm-hmm.
Your house, you generated your house alongside your other characters, and all of your characters were assumed to be in the same house, and the things you did gained XP for your house, and your house improved.
I mean, you're just taking like Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, like that ship is a huge thing, and it has got a life of its own. Although this doesn't really say, it's a major thing. You can roll things like having a death cult on that ship, and that's going to have a huge shift on how people behave themselves on such a ship, cultures and everything else, and
the ship's so big enough, you may have other populations living in the bowels of them. It's like, wait, where did we get Skaven?
Yeah, I mean, to have a just again on that topic of ships and so on, like one Rogue Trader game that I ran, I specified from the very get-go, all ships are different. They've got different hierarchies and different ways that they interpret it. Yes, the Navy of the Imperium has got what is supposed to be standard, but even that varies from ship to ship, from captain to captain. So there are going to be differences that you find. The players eventually got a hold of a second ship, and they learned that it was a feudal run system. And the whole thing was viewed as, the captain was seen as the king, and the different heads of the different departments were seen as, earls, dukes, and so forth. So when the players went, well, we're going to replace the top with our people, that was seen as a major coup, because it was, the whole divine right thing, and it just caused an absolute uproar, and they had a bigger mess at their hands. But that was a character of the ship that they didn't sit down to understand. But that was...
I'm just going to go and sort my dog out. Just bear with me.
Okay.
Well, and not so much Traveler, but for Rogue Trader, you start adding components to it. It starts improving over time, and you're like, well, I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to, as much as we talk about character creation, sometimes it's the little background stuff which has to be done, especially
Well, and another thing, even in like games that might not seem like it as much, like Cyberpunk, for example, at least in Cyberpunk 2020, where they had a very robust equipment and mod system in there for all the gear. Cyberpunk Red really ticks me off in that everything is genericized. Like, you have a heavy assault rifle, and it was so fun in Cyberpunk 2020. I'm like, I've got the Malorian arms, and I've got this scope on it, blah blah blah. But like, your gun in Cyberpunk could be a character, because you have modded it out these ways. Your cyber deck, all the little tweaks, that you made to it, could be a character. So I get you on that. Inanimate objects can be characters. Your base in a superhero game. We were talking about superhero games earlier. The X Mansion versus the Avengers Mansion versus I mean, we had one game where we were playing a franchise of the Avengers who were based out of the Atlantic Ocean, and their headquarters was a modified ocean liner. It was a modified cruise ship was their base. So.
Well, even Forbidden Lands, you start getting it. Well, you need to get this kind of equipment, and over time, you start building up your initial hideout,
your stronghold, man.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And in D&D, that's what it used to be too. Is you're slowly building this up. And while we're saying character creation, depends on what level you want to play at. And I think that's sometimes what, when we're talking about the creation, is you sometimes go, all right, this is a great fighter, but I'd rather have the guy that can be a great stonemason. I'm using Forbidden Lands in this case, because because he'll help us create this that will allow us to do that. And
I mean, that brings me back to a point I had tried to make earlier, is like, some systems don't let you make the character you want to make. Like we were playing the Fantasy Flight Star Wars, and all the skill selections you have to make in there make your character way more advanced than I wanted to play. I wanted to play a farm boy type of character, kind of like a Luke Skywalker, right? Not that I wanted to play Luke and be a Jedi. I like that idea of a humble beginnings rebel character, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I had to go through and place all my starting skills, the only thing I could justify was like a labor leader of a farming community. I mean, I had to have diplomatic skills and all this stuff. I'm like, I don't want to play that. That's why I like the West End game version, the old original D6 version, because in there they have those archetypes and they're all nicely balanced. We talked about this, I think, on another stream. Yes, you can have the smuggler and he starts with a ship, but you also owe a crime lord 10,000 credits. Or you can play the farm. You can play the kid archetype, who has lots of good agility skills and some low mechanical skills, and your starting equipment is like a slingshot and half a six-pack of soda and a dead lizard in your pocket. But
if I can jump in here,
Yeah,
because there's one game that I ran a while back for, again, we were mentioning The Witcher. One like really interesting way that they go about, your character creation. Again, point by, not point by, but it's like World of Darkness. You increase your skills, abilities by doing this. However, then when you go into building your background, you have to determine where you're from. So everyone made their characters, but the one guy who just stands out in this scenario, he said he wanted to play a nobleman, but the noble pack hadn't been come out, so we just customized and said you can play a doctor, but you're from a noble background. Super. He then had to roll for his family, and he rolled that he was the only son out of a family out of 7 children, meaning all of them were girls except for him. Hilarious to begin with. So we were joking nonstop that his dad was, just not able to control himself, an absolute dog. So we then joked, roll again, and we'll see how many bastard children there is. He got 7 additional bastard children for that character.
Fair play to his dad. Fair play.
Yeah, like we were just like, what, like how? And then you have to roll down and see, what is the relationship for every single sibling to you. All the bastard children hated him. They wanted him dead, just outright. I could not make a better plot point, and this was all from the character creations. This was just rolling randomly.
These are the benefits of random elements of character creation.
Yeah, and to then take it a step further, again, you're playing in the Witcher world. You can play a Witcher, and Witcher is almost like 100 years old. They actually go in and say, right, well, for every 10 years, you didn't have to go to the back of the page, and then you have to say, well, what have you been doing for the last 60, 80 years? And you roll that up. And your character can come out and be like, yeah, no, I've got a vicious scar on my face, which penalizes my charisma. But I then also got a skill because I went hunting against a monster and all these other things. You come in with like a big story from the get-go, and you're not just playing, these random smucks that you've just sort of, pulled up from the streets. They've got living, breathing backgrounds, all from random tables that you've just picked and rolled.
Oh yeah,
and it makes it doesn't just stop at like what's happened to you. It's even going so far as to say, who's your friends, who's your allies, who's your enemies, because you can generate all of this.
How much more satisfying is that than having a player hand you 5 or 6 pages of bad fan fiction about how they were the best pupil at the Wizarding Academy, and their father didn't understand.
They killed
them.
a dragon before they started adventuring.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff.
They were the leader of the king's army.
Well, what's neat too about a background like that too is it has a built-in reason for the character to be adventuring. If you're the 7th son of a family, you're inheriting nothing, and so you've got to go out and make your own fortune.
Yes.
I think I agree with you, and I wish that more. I think Palladium had something similar as well. I wish that more of them would do your family tree aspect, like Saxius is talking about, is hey, if you're going to be rolling up this stuff, and again, depends on how hard you are to kill, but if you can do all those backgrounds where it starts filtering down, I think that's a lot better for a background than saying, hey, you write your own background. No, here, you do this, and then you say, okay, why does your sister hate you? Why does this? Why does your brother decide that he's going to put his life on the line for you no matter what?
One of the
Yeah,
as I say, one of the best examples of that in AD&D was the Oriental Adventures book, where you would generate your character's family history like 3 generations back to determine their honor, and like you'd roll like at every stage is like famous general or notable courtesan, whatever it was. It'd have all these things that were plus or minus. A criminal or dishonored uncle, blah blah blah, and then your family honor determined your own personal honor, and then your actions in play then factored back into your family's honor. And if your character died, if you made a character from the same family, you got to use that past honor and those experiences to shape your character.
Is that Pendragon?
That's Oriental Adventures.
Oh, okay.
Oops. I know. There's
it was just talking about how those random rolls can shape your character's background and give you a lot to work with. I know. I think they tried to do something similar with Cavaliers in Unearthed Arcana, at least with where they had to have like an honor or something like that.
I think didn't Unearthed Arcana have some of the family aspects in it too? I can't remember.
Yeah, you could roll your social class, your parentage, whether or not they're married or not, how many siblings you have.
Yeah.
I know. Sorry, go on.
No. I think that those are great things to have in there. I just wish they would. I wish more games would do that instead of asking the players to just generate the background from scratch. Here you go. Here's what happened to you. And like, okay, I like those family tree aspects. I like the fact that does your family have this? Does it have that? I think that adds a lot. I just really wish.
And if those tables are well written, it creates more grounded characters, more believable characters that have more usable role-playing elements and more usable hooks for the DM, rather than I think almost too much. I know people used to write backgrounds for their characters, but it has become the norm. Certainly in 5th edition, and I've seen so many people online bitching about how their DM didn't put in whatever aspect of their backstory or whatever. I much rather take that, as you say, take that out of the player's hands, have it in the game mechanics for character creation, and say, okay, roll on these tables, now come up with something that works with these tables, because you've got something then that will work with the game world, rather than have to create the game world around the player's specific fantasies.
Yeah, and there's a whole other argument there too, because I could easily turn that back around on the player. Like, what did you do to bring your backstory into play as well? Like,
yes.
I think Seth Skorkowski, I mentioned him a lot, but he does a great video on that. Where he's talking, it's the guys in the bar. I'm sure you've seen the sci-fi one where they're in the bar. He's like, I wish there were some Regellians here, and he's like, well, did you say there were any? You were looking for Regellians?
But he says that it took like an hour, and only then did the guy say, well, I was just looking for this.
Oh, no, that's about the town. There's another one where they're in a bar, and he does the same space cantina encounter for Traveler. First time through with all the mistakes. Like, guy goes in, he's like, man, we've been here for like 10 minutes already, and Seth hasn't given me any information as to what's going on with my sick sister. It's all internal thought bubbles, and the one guy's like, man, Seth knows my character hates Omicrons. Why aren't there any Omicrons here? And then they go through the second sketch, and he's like, well, I'm going to walk in and look around, see if anything's going. Well, not much is going on. Okay, well, I'm going to go over to the data term and check to see if I have any messages from my sick sister. well, first thing I do is look around and see if there's any Omicrons here. You know, kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's exactly how the players should be bringing those elements in.
Yeah, like if you're an
Um,
outlaw of, I had a character who called him the outlaw of Ulik. It was in a, Greyhawk campaign, and I just picked a cool sounding country from Greyhawk. That was the extent of my background, right? But every time we were in Ulik, I'm like, so I had to like wear a hood because I was looking around, and I'd be like, does it look like any of the town guards are looking at me? Kind of thing. Because I'm an outlaw here, right?
Well, I think the other part is whenever you're starting to do it, is what power level are you at? I really wish they would do some more backgrounds for that. It's if you're young and other stuff is like, okay, but even the 5e stuff, I think I did one time, was it local hero or something? And I went, what the hell do I have to pick from that actually a first level character could fight that seems somewhat reasonable?
Well, and the background some of the backgrounds are so nebulous. I think, because that folk hero one or whatever it is is like, I almost feel like that's where, you're looking like, I killed a giant rat in a basement once, or I saved a baby from a well,
Well, I wouldn't mind saving the baby from the well, but I said, so we fought an owl bear, and I was the only survivor of the group of hunters that went out to take it out.
It was like us and 50 other people who went after it, just to sort of put it in proportion. It was like, the hero has returned. Yes, that one's more like survivor with PTSD.
Yeah.
But like, so I know that like the folk hero, they threw that at like every single class because I think they just ran out of ideas. Yeah. I'll be honest.
I really wish that a lot of them, like you said with The Witcher, just throw it in there. Just make it. It makes the and that was one of the problems I had. And maybe I get it wrong. Just looking over at what is it? RuneQuest. RuneQuest talks about all your family. And they talk about certain things in your history, but then I feel like they didn't add enough charts and tables to make it really feel like it was fleshed out. They do your grandparents or your parents. But what about your sibling?
Because I know in Pendragon, well, when you start out, at least I don't know if I did it right, but my group, we sat down and for 3 hours we went through the family creation of the great grandfather all the way down to the father and then all the way down to you, the son. We got some hilarious situation with one family where every single man was killed off by Vikings, like just. Every time they got a child and immediately they were cut down. It was like described as this curse of like the moment they sire an heir, God decides that he needs them in his heaven. So that was something that went on there. And another character had his dad just go completely insane when he was told that he had to go out and do a watchtower. He ran into the woods and was never seen again. So it was an ongoing joke that he would be insulted if people would ask him, so when's your dad coming home?
Yeah, it's like I asked my wife about her character recently. I'm like, when you gave me because she gave me a quick backstory on her character. I'm like, for the current 5th edition game, I'm like, so did you ever decide exactly what happened to your grandpa? I mean, we know that he's dead, and you have his stuff, and he was an adventurer, but did they have a body? And she's like, well, I kind of figured I would leave that up to you. I'm like, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, what was the old first?
If you're going to make a backstory, leave it open. Leave plenty of openings.
I think what KBK says here is right. The history and backstory of a character means so much more if it's a played history rather than the fiction. And I think certainly in the case of major events, yes. And this is what coming back to where I do like those random elements that are in rule books for generating this sort of stuff, because those events tend to be a lot more minor, a lot more flavorful. But when they're major events, they real character defining, those ones that really define the organic development of a character in play. Yes, they're much. If it happens at the table, much better. I played I've mentioned him before, my very, very stupid tribal warrior that I played, who, as he was first level, he fired a single arrow at a very, very weak bear, which killed it outright. It didn't matter that the bear was already wounded. and was starving, ravenously hungry, and didn't have many hit points. And he went on to believe that bears were weak and he was the greatest bear hunter in existence.
Yeah.
And a little later on, he got hit for maximum damage by a gnoll with a polearm, which knocked him to zero, I think -1 or -2 hit points. Playing second edition, so we allowed -10 in a single blow, and that caused him to believe that gnolls were the most fearsome fighters in existence, much more powerful than any bear. And that's the way those events shaped his beliefs, and those were major events in his life. The little bits and pieces I dreamt up about him being thrown out of his tribe because he was embarrassingly stupid, because he had really low intelligence and wisdom, but it was dressed up as him going out to prove himself. That's again a very minor thing, but
Yeah, I like it when players come up. So like when I started my current campaign, it was a 0 level campaign, and I sort of wanted to start it at a central town, like you're kind of supposed to, right? In this case, they were all members. So I handed out like a short little questionnaire to all the players, asking some questions because I was going to let them kind of build the hometown. And one of my players, I'm like, okay, write about something bad that that's happened to you in this town. And he's like, he wrote this very nebulous, I could interpret it whatever way I wanted as a DM. He's like, well, Felix thinks he saw a monster rise out of the cornfields one night when he was walking home late one night. I'm like, but he's not sure what he saw. So like, it could be nothing. Maybe Felix just caught the local scarecrow out of the corner of his eye. Maybe there is something out there. That's good backstorying. If you're going to do that. Yeah.
Well, don't let it be wish fulfillment for backstory. Backstory should be giving you plot hooks and motivations of why you're going forward. Not
like
not
my wife didn't write that she was the 3rd generation or more adventurer that made her the greatest adventurer in the universe. She's like, I'm just from a long line of adventurers. And that's why I'm adventuring. I grew up hearing the stories of my mother and my grandfather as adventurers, and I grew up in the inn hearing all the stories of the travelers who came through and all the things that they've talked about, and that is why I'm obsessed with going out there and adventuring myself. Enough said. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna.
Yeah,
something else.
Elle's made a good comment. If the background ties to the final conflict, it makes everything into a meaningless railroad. And in a sense, I agree there, because I don't think the backstory should define the game ending. It should. Again, this is why I like the ones that are tend to be in game rule books as random options, because they're never associated with what the character is going to become. They're just those little quirks.
It's always more effective if the end result tying into somebody's backstory is completely off the cuff and determined by the DM because he decided that was awesome. Like,
Yeah, as an option, great, but the player shouldn't expect it.
Like,
and
as much as he
expect it, it's like, I put this in. I demand you include my backstory and make it part of the overall narrative.
As much as he claims to have written the entire saga, and I'm pretty sure George Lucas never had any idea that Darth Vader was Luke's father when he started writing it.
Actually, no, my mother says that was such a trope for all the literature she read.
It is, but also he has made, and not to go on a tangent here, but if you watch his interviews back way early on, and then his later interviews, he really is a revisionist of his own greatness. He's like, oh yeah, I've had it all figured out, and it was all you outlined and stuff. No, it wasn't. You didn't even know if it was going to work. It was basically I can make a movie. But yeah, but he just tied into tropes. So, and that's what I'm saying about the DM. I'm kind of using that to illustrate here. So if somebody is like in the example of my wife, right, I could easily say down the road, the big bad that's been pulling the strings for the, this giant campaign arc, and he pulls you knock his helmet off, and it's your grandfather.
Well, I'm going to bring something up. I don't,
and it would be awesome, but it was never planned.
I don't mind railroads if it's if it's part of what everyone says is okay, you're going to be fighting X, whatever the empire. At some point, what, and this is your background. That's very different. The problem that I have is I don't want to put this. I don't mind a starting point. I don't mind the end point. Well, it's the journey in between that matters. And the problem that I have with it all too often is that no, you have to do this and this and this and this, rather than saying, well, you go this way.
The beats are laid out.
Yeah. I'm like, no. It reminds me of anyone that's played The Witcher 3. Mm-hmm. What did I do? As I played all the side quests just before I was going to do this, and it's like, okay, the side quests add a lot more to these things. You'll still get there, but it's more like a drunk driver, on the road. That's to me is how a game should be. Is you got bumpers on either side, but you just kind of weave.
That's why I prefer Baldur's Gate 1 to Baldur's Gate 2, because there was a lot more roaming around, a lot more freedom to move.
Yeah, well, in that case too, though, they had huge budgetary cuts and directorial failings on the second one.
Yeah. But I do absolutely agree with Omen, in the sense of that the players should always have the liberty to decide that no, we're going to go over that hill to find out what's on that hill, and it's going to be a bumper ride. They'll start quests, they'll ditch quests, and they'll try to accomplish them. They think they might have accomplished a quest, only to realize later that no, they only got like 25% done with it before they thought they'd accomplished it. And that's gaming in my experience. It's how it goes. It is not from point A to point B to point C. It's very much like from point A to point A2, then A1, then back to A3, then skipping over to C4, and then so forth and so forth. And there's just no telling how the players are going to do this. It all seems logical to them. You're just looking at them going,
while I don't like quantum ogres and stuff, it does give you a great amount of freedom to they didn't go where I planned to, but they went to the next town over, but they could probably still hear the same rumor,
Yeah. I mean, a good example, I ran Red Hand of Doom, wonderful module, would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who is interested. And it's very much, point A, point B, point C, and it's laid out there. But the more familiar you become with the module, the more you find that you can actually skip entire parts of it and still keep the story going. It's not going to affect the fun of the game. It just means that there's going to be more monsters at the end of it that they'll have to sort of, come face to face with. But the creators of that module then really sat down and went, well, we've got to think really hard how we can string you along, and how an experienced GM can easily just go, we don't need this, we can replace this, we can do this, and we can do that. It's extraordinary versatile in that sense, for module, that is.
I think that a lot of even the old modules, a lot of times, it wasn't that you had to do, you had the evil cleric at the very end of the room, but how you went through the rooms, just, you could go, and I like the the multiple paths to get the same location.
The Shaquazed dungeons.
But while everyone says, "Oh no, railroad," come on, almost all the Call of Cthulhu are kind of a railroad, but it's just like because you have to, otherwise.
I think we're off topic here, but I think.
well, that's
Forget Me Not isn't. Forget Me Not isn't.
We still went off in weird directions in Forget Me Not, even though you have.
Well, no, Forget Me Not isn't a railroad. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much, because it's just, here's a setting, here's the bad guy, here's what's happening, off you go. And the characters have so much more freedom in that one.
So I'm going to bring something up. Yeah, I'm going to bring up something that I think that a lot of us we're all looking at your initial character creation. But if you look at the original Dungeons and Dragons, they talked about, and I think this also happened to Warhammer, is when your character dies, you inherit the stuff from your previous one because you're a child of X character. And so after a while, you break your own lineage, that aspect, as you go through. And I think that's a kind of a cool thing that's missing in a lot of stuff. Now, I'm not saying you want everyone overpowered, but it's one of these things that, okay, you can bequeath them certain amounts here, plus some experience, plus this. Like, all right, that encourages me to create my own family.
I remember there was one of the character sheets which had a little will at the bottom, didn't
Oh
there?
yeah, there were things in the rules about wills, little
Yes.
stuff that were covered, and we used to just like, I leave my sword to such and Bubba the fighter, and my plate mail I leave to the cleric who has always been there by my side, and
Well, mechanically, the point of the will was to bequeath the stuff to your next character.
I know we never
Yeah.
played it that way though.
And, I don't know if they intended
We had
this or
actual
not.
wills.
I don't know if they intended it or not, but I also allow them the character receiving the bequeath to get the XP for that stuff. That way
That's interesting.
you're not starting at first level and everybody else is 10th, right?
I am gonna have to bounce off here, but it has been a lot of fun. Great talk, everyone, and props for everyone for staying on topic for so long. Well done. Gold stars all around.
Are we Shadow of the Demon Lord in tomorrow night?
Oh yeah, it's still on.
How many goblins have we got tomorrow night?
At the moment, I think we're gonna have 3 goblins.
All of the goblins.
It's more than enough for the madness, you guys.
All of your goblins belong to us.
Yeah. Well,
So I've got to, when I'm at work in the shop tomorrow, I've got to practice my goblin voice with the customers.
That'll go over well. So, do we have any more topics or bullet points for the night?
I'm going to say
I haven't got my disc. I haven't got my Discord open, so I can't remember.
Because if not, I had a question I wanted to ask.
Well, Omen was about to say something. Then yeah, come in after
go.
that.
well, no. I think that alphabet, because mine's going to be kind of like the end question, which is of your character creation, what is your favorite? And from any system or anywhere else, what has been your favorite?
My favorite in terms of fun of making the character, it's got to be the hero system. I love mathing it all out, but I hate playing that game.
It's its own mini game until you.
It is. It's like, all right, well, I want this really badass power, but if I make it to where it only works on every third day, and it's in an obvious, accessible focus with a limited number of shots, and it only affects these kind of people, then it'll cost me 1 point out of the 500 I have to budget. It's like, but it can be useless. It's just it's nuts. It's the ultimate control. It's fun to make, but yeah, I don't want to play that game.
Now Saxius has gone, I will admit that I thoroughly enjoyed character creation in Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Now that he's not here.
Because
he's probably still in chat.
Yeah, I just love those little quirks you roll for your character, and they're so well done. They're so flavorful, and yes, some of them are a little bit edgy, but the game's meant to be a bit edgy.
And there's nothing wrong with being edgy. If you're all playing with adults, then they can be hilarious, which I think sometimes people forget. It's a game. If you're not laughing and having fun,
you're doing something wrong.
Yeah,
Grimdark is super popular for a reason.
Which one? Which game was that, Elfbait?
Grimdark.
Oh,
just
okay,
the
style rather
theme,
than
the style,
game,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sean, do you have a favorite game, favorite character creation system?
I'm fond of the 4d6 drop the lowest, at least for AD&D. I mean, again, it depends on what you're playing. I like the 3d6 down the line, but I wouldn't do that for AD&D. I do that for OSE. But the reason I like the 4d6 drop the lowest, especially in AD&D context, is that there are still limitations there. You could still bum out, but it is flexible enough that players usually don't complain, even when they get an arguably substandard character. They'll work with it. So I and it's quick and easy. That's the other thing. As I get older, I want fast and efficient. I don't want some calculus level system that determines everything by mathematical superiorities. Like let's get the character done and go.
That's one advantage with Shadow of the Demon Lord. It takes 5 minutes to create a character. It is because you have default stats based on your race, because you haven't got yourself a class yet, and you just roll yourself some quirks. And those quirks are a lot of fun, and off you go. Play them quirks. play them up. One thing I was going to ask you all, because something it just popped back into my head just before my dog was harassing me. One thing I have noticed is, and I've seen quite a bit of pushback on this, about players not playing their character stats. For example, saying things like, I've got my character's got an intelligence of 8. Am I supposed to sit out when I'm not going to sit out when when they're trying to formulate plans, or that sort of thing? And I have a feeling that sort of attitude has crept in as a result of the point buy, where they're buying abilities to make their characters more powerful and pushing away role-playing elements that can be drawn from those abilities. They're of secondary importance.
I think that's happened to a great degree with rolled stats in the past too, though. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it's
statistics
a
can
new
be hard
trend.
to play. I mean, honestly, it's hard to play dumb, especially in a hobby that's full of on the average, above average folks. Yeah, as far as thinkers and problem solvers and stuff like that, it is hard to be that person and then sit there and go and play an ignoramus. It's like
Sometimes though, it's so liberating because you're just looking at stuff like, I think the other problem that you get is playing.
This lever is clearly a trap. I wonder what happens if I pull it.
I mean, and you can do that. I mean, I've met some people who do that. I mean, I've talked about the half orc who came back from the temple ruins saying there was all these little feet scattered all over the place, and the party was horrified, thinking that the temple grounds were scattered with severed feet. And what he was describing is the footprints that he saw there. Like, there's all these little feet everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, and some of it just comes down to, I hate saying this, especially if you have really high physical stats and you want really low mental stats. Low wisdom is a lot of fun, especially whenever you have charming monsters.
Yeah.
Or just questionable role play, like a cloaked figure steps from the alley and says, "Hey, brother, come with me and I can show you something wonderful." And you're like, "All right."
I'll give you how my stupid tribal warrior was introduced to a new group. It was an existing group, and I joined the group later on. They were all 3rd or 4th level. I was 1st level. And he came sort of wandering up, holding this map. And it was basically a few scrawls on a bit of paper. And hello, I appear to be lost. This map's wrong, or at least this map's not working. I've been following that arrow that's pointing towards an N. So I know N. I know that's the letter N, and I know N is the first letter of nice. So that's where nice things are. So I've been going towards that N. I wake up every morning, I look at it, and if it points, and in the direction it points, that's the way I go. And that's how he started. And, it all played on from there. And he claimed that he was the greatest chef from his tribe, that he was in charge of making all the food. A complete lie. And he said, I'll go pick some mushrooms. I'll make some mushroom stew. And then he started going into a little story about how his trusty dog had passed away a few days earlier. And I picked some mushrooms, failed the roll dreadfully to find suitably edible mushrooms, managed to poison the party, get them all up all night with diarrhea. And the first thing they asked me in the morning was, this stew you make, did you make some a few days ago? And feed the leftovers to your dog? Oh, yes. So it created a little sort of plot thing whereby the rest of the characters were saying he's killed his own dog.
I remember playing a low charisma noble character. Like the last fighter character I made was a noble son, and he had a low charisma. But I played him like he thought he had a high charisma. So we'd go to the end and be
Done
like,
that. I've done that.
"Hello, how's it going?" Everybody's like,
And they got to give you respect through gritted teeth because you're a noble.
Now,
Yes.
now, look. Now, this is my now. Look here. You shut up. You shut up, and you shut up. I'm the most intelligent one here. I know what's going on. You're an idiot, and it go on and on and on and on and on, and someone else would go, no, let me talk to me. And I'll turn around and go, no, I've told you, I'm more intelligent than you. I'm the leader as a result. So I'm going to organize this. And his charisma was low as well.
In terms of when my players are, they've got the low intellect or wisdom, I don't enforce anything. I don't say, well, no, that plan's too stupid. You wouldn't have come up with it. Play as you will. Now, because players have different levels of skill. Not everybody can act or role play. So you'll get the good actors who, I've got a 6 intellect and a 7 wisdom, and then they play it to the hilt, and it's great. There are other ways to do it too. I often do I'll have people make intellect checks. Like if they want a piece of information that it's rational the character might have, it's like, all right, do you know it, right? And so characters with the low intellect are less likely to know stuff, and that's a good way to mechanically offset that, even if the player is not necessarily playing the dummy.
And I think it's reasonable. I mean, we let people who are in no way near the physical condition of their barbarian lift things. So
yeah, exactly. The other thing is having a clear delineation, the way to explain to players the difference between intelligence and wisdom, because that often comes up. People say, "Well, what's the difference?" One of my players, he's like, "Well, it should just be one stat. What's the difference?" It's like, well, that's a low wisdom response, I think.
What was the one thing talking about ability scores based on tomatoes? Intelligence is knowing it's a tomato. Wisdom is knowing that a tomato doesn't make good dessert, or something.
No. Intelligence is knowing a tomato is a fruit.
Yeah.
Wisdom is knowing that it doesn't go in a fruit salad.
Exactly. Something like that. I couldn't remember.
But yeah, that's how I delineate it. Intelligence is what you know. Wisdom is how you apply it. Right? It's your common sense.
I mean, I always looked at wisdom as this is mental fortitude.
Yeah,
so,
that's there too.
Yeah, so some of it, and maybe that's the problem I think is with the word wisdom is when you actually look at it, it's like you're plenty smart, but guess what? You're cowardly little, you're cowardly because you just don't have the mental fortitude for whatever. I don't care how big and strong you are. And we've all seen this. My friend has worked in Halloween houses. He says, and some of the biggest guys are the ones that scream the loudest.
Well, it's just like the charisma attribute has often been misinterpreted. It's like, a lot of people are like, "Are you really good looking?" Well, you could be really good looking and just be a dud.
Exactly.
Or you could be really ugly and actually like a smooth talker who can convince anybody, to do anything.
How many of the most effective, and I won't say nicest because a lot of them weren't very nice, but how many of the most effective world leaders had model good looks? You look at very few of them. Very, very few.
One of the most famous ones was a short guy with a bad haircut and a cheesy mustache. But
Exactly. And he obviously had a high charisma because he had whole countries behind him fighting for his beliefs.
Canada's current prime minister is the son of a former prime minister who was known for being, very headstrong but charismatic. But he was ugly as sin.
And now his son is just good looking, but it has
has nothing else.
has like the intelligence and charisma of a potato.
I did have a question that I wanted to ask folks.
Well then,
character creation. Is there a idea for a character creation that you have wanted to see in use but have not? Like, is there a way of generating characters that you've always kind of imagined might be fun?
Pure random. I've been actually pondering this for 5th edition, doing a video talk in 5th edition for modern gamers who don't know random. It's like try rolling everything randomly. Do your stats in order randomly determine your race, randomly determine your background, randomly determine, well, choose your class. You'll have some agency, but everything else is random. See what you get. And I think a lot of old school players are like, yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, I can
imagine the aneurysms that modern players would have.
I think, we talk about modern players, but we're talking about 5e modern players. But this is one of the great things over the last month is just hearing the number of people that want to try something different.
Yeah.
not that they won't come back, or that they don't love 5e, but it's like, you know what? Let's try something else, and that's what I've really been excited about.
I should qualify that my filter is generally D&D first, because that's
Yeah.
pretty much where I sit these days. And but a lot of well, I say modern players, but a lot of people I've played this. I do some public games once in a while for a local D&D group, and yeah, the cliche we talk about, the modern player, is alive and well. But yeah, you're absolutely, there's definitely more beyond that.
Well, I'm saying, but like I know that Elfbait will argue about this as well. I use my friend as a perfect example for stuff, and I think sometimes, whether we look at it or not, is I like Conan because I can do a fully random character and still come up with something that still seems useful. I mean, that's the weird thing that I like about that system. And like, I've done it before. I'm like, let me try creating a bad character, and after a while, you're just like, you know what? It's still playable.
I will say, the one thing I wanted to try for a long time, and I have done recently, is the game that Omanal you played in, and Sean you played in, where I created the characters, but where the players don't know anything about their character when they start, and they have to discover about their character as they go on by trying to use various skills. I wanted to see what sort of game it produced. Again, I've read horror stories about people attempting that, and people say, "Oh, it's not very. Oh, it's a car crash. Oh, it doesn't really work properly." No, done right, it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
It worked absolutely beautifully.
So I'm going to bring this up for brand new characters, which is what I've wanted to do, but I haven't done. And we're talking about skill-based games primarily here. Instead of players coming in and they assign their stats, especially for new players, I said, you know what? We're going to do this. As you have a certain number of points, as you play the game, if you find a skill that's useful, you can just put points in it and you can just roll from that way. And that way players don't feel like they're picking skills that aren't useful to the game, but they also feel that, but they're still limited in their creation. But that way they feel like their characters are, and I'm going to use World of Darkness. You can pick a lot of skills that will never be used in certain types of games. And then you feel like, well, they didn't care about my character. Whereas this one would be completely different. It's like, oh, you come to a door, you're like, you know what? I think I know lockpicking. Okay, put lockpicking down for your skill. You get like 5 more or whatever your stats are for that, and just move on.
So on the fly building them.
Yeah,
exactly. I have 2 that I would like to try sometime.
Sure.
And one is the players make characters in like a real world setting, and then they don't know what kind of game they're playing.
Oh,
like you just make a regular person, and then you don't know, is it a zombie apocalypse? Is it Fallout? Is it vampires and the supernatural? Is it Call of Cthulhu? You just make regular characters, and then slowly. The other one I really would like to do was inspired by one of the old Ultima games, where you do the tarot draws that then determines your character. I want to do that in a fantasy RPG, or alternately like Norse runestone kind of pulls, and what you pull determines what your character is. These were the lots that were drawn at your day of birth, and
that'd be fun.
The only problem I have with that system is I think it works great for a skill-based system, is you can do stuff like that. You're kind of guiding them through, but for some of these level-based systems, which are requiring your niche protection, it doesn't work as well, because then you're missing out some of those crucial other classes that you need to really go through it. That's the only negative I see with that. But like I said, for a skill-based system, I think that works out great.
Maybe though, you've got a limited number of cards in the deck or runes, and once one is drawn, it's not available to the next player, guaranteeing everyone gets something different.
But then that comes down to the questions: do the characters get what they want to play? That's the hard part.
Well, I think there's a basic conceit there, is this is how we're making this game, how we're running this game.
Right. If you
is
bought
this something
into
you want to play?
Yeah.
Sure. Because
Yes.
I mean, I did something similar for this Viking campaign that I was setting up, where players would make their characters normally at D&D style, and then they get to randomly draw a rune, which is their birth rune. It's not very like actually Viking. It's fantasy Viking, obviously, but and then I have each of them written up in a big chart what it means to modify their, how it modifies their starting character. And this goes back to something I did in AD&D where I had a D100 characteristic roll that the players, all my PCs rolled, and it was everything from, you have a nest egg, get an extra 100 gold pieces, to whatever you roll. You have a family heirloom, you can start the game with a +1 weapon. You have a title, but some of them were negative too. It's like, you are deformed. You have,
Well,
your family's name is tarnished.
Dungeon Call Classics has that with their luck roll. You roll the luck, and it determines on what it affects.
Well, I know there's been systems that have done that, but yeah, it's an idea that I've played with for a long time, and my players really liked it because, and the reason I came up with it is I remember reading a lot of books and like, yes, we have these basic archetypes, but they always had some little quirk that made them special. And then, I think I started writing in, I think it originally was like a D20 chart. And then after the second edition stuff came out and we started getting the cultural books, I started incorporating stuff from there, and it became a D100 chart. Be like, oh, you've got monster blood, add +1 to one of your ability scores.
Well, I like some of those things because it really separates separately from other aspects. Like, oh, cool. But I think that comes back down to a lot of backgrounds and saying, oh, well, you get this. Oh, you get that. And I agree. I don't, and when I was younger, and sometimes I still hate the complete randomness, but I also hate having every character built exactly the same, that looks the same, feels the same. Sometimes I wish what they would do is, okay, if you roll the, even if you're doing kind of a point buy, which is, okay, you roll this, but you're in this range, you roll too low, guess what? The next one goes up a little bit. But yeah, I really do feel I feel sometimes that players get into the rut of playing the exact same type of character, exact same type of build. Well, this one dies, I'll just make one that's identical. And there's the randomness kind of forces them to get outside of that. And really, I think players just, how do I want to put this? Try it. I think that's one of the things I liked about DCC. Just try it our way. You can do it any other way, but just try it our way and see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, then do some other way. And I like that aspect. I think sometimes we're trying to push character creation to be perfect, that gives the players everything that they want, and to say, you know what, if I had been smart as a kid, more, what I want to say is probably more wise, I would have played clerics a lot more often, and realizing that they're real powerhouses if they're used right, instead of just using them as like you'll just heal and you carry heavy armor. No.
Well, another side effect of the build system, and jumping on what you're saying, is that players have gotten used to the optimization factor, to always being the best of the best, being the top of their game. And I've seen players get so put out when there's even a single attribute point, like a 1 point difference, that didn't get to where they wanted it. And it's like, oh, this character's fucking useless now. Or, one guy in my 5e game complained that his fighter had a strength of 14. That really hurt because he was now useless. +2 modifier was absolutely useless, but if he had +3, his character would be unstoppable.
Yeah, that's a power gamer, though. They're looking for the optimal.
But it's a side effect that even non-power gamers are adopting that mentality.
I will say, I've only experienced that sort of mentality with one adult player since I've been playing. I've only been back in the hobby since 2011, and there's only been one person I've come across who's been like that in terms of his character. But when I was playing in my teens, it was there all the time. And coming back to the point I made earlier, that I do think it comes down to a lot of gaming maturity.
I don't disagree. No.
I-
As kids, yeah, we wanted to win. We wanted to win
Yes.
the game. But yeah, as you mature, you get older. Like what we're talking about. Oh, he's put on the shirt. he's advertising.
I'm going to be honest to you guys because we're talking about old school essentials. No, that was just a plain white T-shirt from work. But no, at well, I guess in probably about half an hour or so, our local bar I'm sorry, it sells food, so it doesn't have to. They said that they have to sell more food than alcohol, so that they don't fall under the same regulations. But anyway, it's a local bar where their guy was trying to. He's actually stopped me in the supermarket and said, "Hey man, I got this game and I got OSE." I said, "Oh okay, I'll come." So, not my favorite thing on a Wednesday night because I like to pretend I go to bed at a reasonable time. I like the option to go to bed at a reasonable time. Let's rephrase that. I may not follow it. But no, after we're done, I'm going to head over there and just see what it's like and talk to him and maybe bring some of my weird games just so he can look at them.
You mean you're going to fill up the entire back seat of your car with your weird games because you've got so many of them?
I feel bad because I didn't realize how many sci-fi games I had, and I was counting like I have 13 different ones. Oh, I missed a few, and I went, yeah, maybe that's kind of bad. I haven't even read them all. They're on sale for half off. I'm like, yeah, they sound cool. I'll go buy that one. I'll go buy. That's the problem with Black Friday sales or sales during the summer. Like, well, I better get them now before the price goes up again. And at half off, they're willing. At $30 for a book that's pretty thick. That's no problem. But no, I think that's. But I think that is something that we keep forgetting about. It's just like watching my father sometimes, where he doesn't remember certain things, like when he was young, and he's like, "I was never that way." Dad, I remember you saying, "Let's go watch The Woman with Big Boobs" when I was 5. He's like,
Hey, my brother's dad taught him how to wink at women when they're out and around. Just so.
Well, I mean, I think so. All too often, people forget what they were like when they were that age, and they think they've always been the current age that they are. So when I hear, maybe your group was different, but I can tell you this much: I played with a bunch of power gamers, and we min-maxed everything, and every character was either a female drow or a druger, and all these powers. And
even before second edition came out with rules for playing monsters, we're like, could I play an orc? What if I wanted to play a lizard man? All it took was me flipping through Rogue's Gallery and seeing that there was a centaur and a lizard man in there. I'm like, all right. Yeah.
Well, you had the reincarnation. Your character was literally going to come back as one of those. And then the Dragon magazines before second edition have a few of the monsters in there. Yeah, I mean,
well, it's a concept that's been in the game since OD&D.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, but I remember how I was at that point, and now as I get older, it's just, you look at it and say, hey guys, I don't like this character. It really feels like you're going to dominate the game too much. I want everyone to shine, and that's one of the things, when we start going through it is, I'm going to guide you a certain way, or I'm going to guide you this way. I want you to feel, we all talk about character creation, but I think the one thing that I say we are all, but I think a lot of people are missing is, as the DM, you really should be sitting down with all the players together and create the characters ideally as a group. I understand not always, but
it sounds suspiciously like a session 0. We don't talk about that here.
well,
we had a stream.
You're going to be telling me you had safety tools.
We've already had a stream on session 0, and I think we came out saying that
we had safety tools as kids. As a DM, you could not overdo it. Otherwise, they were going to pummel you. Your players were going to gang up and pummel you. Or at least
you'd get a dude, what the fuck?
Yeah, well
I got called corrupt DM all the time.
Oh, well, that was the other part of, well, you know what? I don't like your game. I'm going to run my own game. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to run with your game. And also like,
safety tools was that having an empty table the next time you try and ran a game.
Well, I mean, there were things in there, but like you were talking about, it's on the bus. But I think that it's really important to make sure that you get cohesive characters that will interact with each other, number one.
Yes.
And character creations that do that. And then the other part is
build an adventurer and build an adventuring party.
Yeah, well, exactly. And
I say build in the metaphorical, not in the actual character generation geek, just before you have an aneurysm.
No, hold it. Elfbait, you're probably going to appreciate that. Unless you're playing Promethean, If you're familiar with that, where you get to play basically a Frankenstein or something.
Well,
Then-
yeah,
Then characters are built.
you're literally built.
Yes. No,
I'm playing my droid from Star Wars. I'm built for sure.
Yes. But I think that's part of it. It's like, guys, can we get together? Let's all talk about it. Let's get this in there. I think
even
that
if you don't, it's your responsibility as a player to make a character who wants to adventure. And people are always like, "It's not what my character would do." You control what your character would do. And
Yes.
even within that scope of it's not what my character would do, you can interpret that however you want. Fine. Your character doesn't like dark, spooky, monster-filled holes. But that's what we're here to do. So you get to come up with that logic and that rationale for why you're going to go. It's what I like to call the Bilbo has to leave the Shire.
wait. Okay, everyone remembers the Indiana Jones, but I don't like snakes. Yes, but you still have to go down there.
Yeah,
Go
Amy
down
still
there.
goes down into the hole full of snakes. So
Yes.
Asps, very deadly. You go first.
Yeah. Well, and then what was it? The second one with the bugs. You got to reach in there and save us.
Yeah.
Where she has to pull the lever.
and that's the thing. I mean, ultimately, you have to make an adventure, and it helps to have a party that is built cohesively. But if not, at least have a character come up, be able to be flexible enough with your character. And I guess this is still on topic to make a character who can find a reason. The big archetypical no is the lone wolf, right? You always hear people talk about the lone wolf and how it sucks, or the edgelord, or the lone wolf edgelord. But even those characters, the people who play them and cause the trope, is because they don't understand. They cause the gaming trope. They don't understand the literary trope or like the comic book trope or the movie trope. Lone wolves and edgelords still always bond with somebody. Wolverine has his thing for Jean Grey. Yeah.
Raceland was an edgelord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He still was. Yeah, he was still.
And even
part
if,
of
and
it,
the thing is, it doesn't even have to necessarily be a positive connection with the character. Because going back to Wolverine, he has his rivalry with Cyclops all the time. Because it centers around the Jean Grey thing, right? So they're always going back and forth. But that could still be fun in game context if both players are in on it, right?
Yes.
Like
the banter would just come naturally.
That's why you don't have the secret squirrel crap at the table.
Well, the ultimate, to use your Wolverine example, is like he's a loner, sure, but he also has strong paternal instincts. Like he's always taking in the young character.
Like all those times he runs into Power Pack.
Yeah. Or Jubilee, or whoever, or Shadowcat. He's got very strong paternal connections to younger members of the team.
I think that's but like you said, is when you create your character, try to create it with the other players in mind. Which in some ways, and this is just, I want to say, don't be a dick. If someone wants to, I mean that should be a universal rule overall.
I just want a T-shirt that says that on it.
Is if you're going to be playing and you know that someone wants to be a great archer, don't create your character so it's a better archer than theirs are. That's just being a dick, It's like
it all goes back to when me and my friends were playing Hawk the Slayer out on the playground. It's like, I'm going to be the elf.
But I mean, that's what part of it comes down to is, learn your role for that. That's one of the reasons I actually like, which is a little bit different for advancement, is one of the things I did like about, I guess it was Exalted and a few of the other Onyx Path / White Wolf games. You get an experience point for giving other players the limelight. And I hate saying that, especially for players that want to advance as quickly as they can, they're going to make sure they get that point by making sure other players get in the limelight, which benefits everybody.
Me as a DM, as far as character balance goes, the only thing I care about when I'm DMing is balance of spotlight.
Yes.
You get the odd player who likes to sit in the background and let things happen. But in general, I will try and move the spotlight around and try and make sure everyone gets involved in some way. And that's the only level of balance I really care about. Just making sure people get their opportunity to be involved.
That does double back on the make a character who actually does stuff thing, though, because there's always that guy who likes to sit back in the back of the table and then afterwards bitches because his character never gets to do anything. It's like, well, you didn't do anything. You didn't. You got to make a move, buddy.
Well, I mean, what did we do with Grumpy Old Slam when he was playing Cressy? Oh, look, like, here's what we're gonna do. We're just throwing forward, like, let's see how he gets out of this one. With his.
You're the youngest one. You're the lowest rank. Off you go. That's an order.
Well, no, I'm referring when it's love interest. We're still like, oh, I get to play off of this one, and now Presley has to do this.
Yes.
I mean, that really brings up. So many players are afraid of conflict between characters, and again, if they're both in on it, that's just gold.
Well, that boils down to. Yeah. Sorry, finish your thought. No,
go ahead. That was done.
Okay. I just boils down to what I said about earlier about what I call avatar play. It's because they are personally connected to their character. They assume the other is as well. So they don't want to insult or offend or attack another character, either verbally or physical, whatever, because it'll be perceived as an attack on the person. And then likewise the same. Any attack on the character they're playing is an attack on them. And that's very prevalent. People don't know how to separate the player from the character.
Yeah. Well, and I don't mind what I want to say when it's consensual antagonism, which really means is that two players go off and say, you know what? Let's say that Eli decides to play Wolverine. Like, you know what? I'm going to play Gambit, and we're going to have our little, one up, whatever, or anything else. Like, oh, okay, or it's like, well, I'm going to do this. It's like, yeah, okay. That to me is consensual, and that's something that really should happen at the beginning of character creation. Is we just go, you know what? I don't like you. Yeah, I don't like you either. All right, let's go play this out. And
it can create some of the best comic moments, can't it?
Although I really have to wonder what that conversation sounds like if you were to get a bunch of people talking about World of Darkness, because you want to talk about like constant interplay and challenge and confrontation and friction. That's that universe, though.
It is, but what I want to say is there. And I know that you're probably pretty similar. Most of the time when I'm playing a role playing, not always. If I want to play Dark Card, that's different. But a lot of times I want to play the pulpy fiction. But even in Even in Alien, they always had some conflicts between two characters.
Well, the Alien RPG
conflict drives story. It drives drama. Two things, Omanel. First, your positioning makes you kind of look like Inspector Gadget, the fan right over your head.
I know.
To your point about two players deciding that their characters are going to butt heads, I actually prefer the organic approach. I mean, it's premeditating. It can go any number of ways, but watching two players realize, oh, my character and this character, we don't like each other. That's actually a lot of fun to watch because then you see the characters feeling it through, the players feeling it through.
I don't.
Yeah. I would much rather have it organic, but at least accepted at the table that it's a thing that people can do and then be mature.
Understanding that the players will not take it personally. Yeah, 100%.
And that's what I mean by consensual is that's one of those things. The other part is antagonism is good. What I don't like is the player combat inside, because like this, what does make it, like I've heard this happen all too often. Oh, I decided to do this and stab so and so. It's only a D4, for my 50 hit points. Like, you understand that you're literally stabbing someone with a knife. That's not. Yeah. That's what I get mad at.
Antagonism is good, but pushing it to the level of trolling them isn't.
Yeah.
I suppose the exception would be like, in terms of like, the predetermined stuff would be if that's part of their concept. Like, let's say two characters decide that they're going to make a couple of musketeer type characters, or Felix and Gotrek from the Warhammer universe, and they're like, their whole thing is they've fought together back to back, and they're going to be about banter and squabbling, or just to use classics. I'm going to play Legolas, and my friend says he's going to play Gimli, and
but that's a friendly rivalry. That's what it's either.
Or we all agree that two of the halfling players are going to be a bunch of gits who get into trouble all the time.
And on that note, we have come to the witching hour. We've it's 4 minutes past midnight here in the UK, which of course is the proper time, Greenwich Mean Time. None of your American nonsense. But that does mean it is time for me to go to bed because I've got work in the morning. I think with each week going by, our streams are getting better and better. I'm going to say that now. I think we are getting the balance of what we talk about a lot better. I think we're putting our points across a lot better. And it's all coming through practice. And I want to thank all of it. Well, Saxius, who's obviously gone to bed already, but all three of you. I think tonight has been excellent. I think tonight's been it's been one of my favorite streams so far. I think
I enjoyed it.
It's been entertaining, it's been enlightening, and lots of positives from chat as well. So thank you all. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Omanal. I don't know your real name, Omanal.
Oh, it's up to you if you want me to tell you. I just am not doing it on stream at the moment. I'm John. Jotner. No her. Just Jotner. But no, we've had. I think we've had a great stream tonight. Thank you, everyone, for your input. It's been marvelous, splendid, spiffing, super. Yes, wonderful. But do you want to shill for your channels before you go?
Mages, you're first. You're in the pole position, man.
Oh yeah. Yes, please come to Mage's Musings. I am working on new videos. I promise. It's been a month, I know, but season 2 is looming. So we'll find out what happened to the wizard. Did he get his soul eaten, or will something distract the demi-lich?
For me, Elfbait is the channel. Right now, doing live streams. I am floating them around on days, so the next one's going to be next Monday, 10 a.m. Central Time. So I know it's hard for some folks to get to them, but I'm trying to get it early enough to where people across the water can be to them. So
I don't work on Mondays. I have a game on a Monday evening. But,
I might see you. I mean, we'll see. But yeah, it's just general chat about on topics at this point. So nothing too huge.
Good stuff. And if anyone in chat wants to shill a channel, I know we've had a few people in chat tonight who've got channels: Shadow and Sun, Crafting Gamer, Squirrel Hermit, to name but 3.
Dungeon Minister was in for a bit.
Dungeon Minister was in for a while. Yes.
He's a great one.
Yes, all worth a subscription. So support people who get involved in chat, support our regular panelists. But on that note, thanks all for taking part. Great stream tonight. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks.
Good night.